Good morning. I'm Mike Beam, the Kansas Secretary of Agriculture. We want to welcome you to the 6th Annual Kansas Summit on Agricultural Growth. The Kansas Department of Agriculture has traditionally hosted the Governor's Ag-Growth Summit in Manhattan in the end of August, and we were very much looking forward to seeing you all again this year in person. Unfortunately, it became clear a couple of weeks ago that an in-person event with as many attendees as we expected was not advisable or appropriate. We reminded ourselves that we could reach and engage more people located many hours away from Manhattan and do so in a safe setting, such like we've planned for today. We appreciate all of you joining us and hope you'll enjoy the conversations we have planned for you. We'll be directing our time towards critical topics that affect the entire agricultural industry across all sectors.
And speaking of agricultural sectors, many of you also participated in one or more of our sector breakout sessions, which have taken place as Zoom meetings over the last month and a half, and the ongoing discussion about how Kansas agriculture community can work together to identify our desired outcomes for growth in all sectors of the industry, and then take action to achieve these outcomes. Later this morning, we'll share some key takeaways from these meetings, but we wanted to thank those of you who have taken time to help with those events by serving as panelists, moderators, and guests. The Kansas Agricultural Growth Strategy is founded on the understanding that when Kansas agriculture grows, the entire state's economy grows. In the years since we began this effort, it has been clear that the strategic industry growth, communication, coordination, and collaboration between private industry and public sector has been critical to the successes that we've seen in agriculture. Today, Ag Growth Summit is the culmination of that, requires the collaborative spirit as we join together in one shared goal, growing Kansas agriculture.
A partner we have in that shared goal is Governor Laura Kelly. Governor Kelly has continued to show her support for the state's agricultural industry and has personally visited with many agricultural businesses this year to hear from Kansans directly and celebrate growth and achievement in agriculture and our rural communities. This included a biofuels plant visit, flour manufacturer, dairy operation, beef cattle ranch, meat processing businesses, and several other agriculture-related businesses. We are pleased today to have Governor Kelly with us to share some words about her appreciation for and commitment to Kansas agriculture. It's my honor to introduce the Governor of Kansas, Governor Laura Kelly.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 6th Annual Kansas Governor's Summit on Agricultural Growth. As you all know, Kansas agriculture has been and always will be the backbone of our state's economy. We are national leaders in production. We rank first in wheat and sorghum, second in cropland acreage, and third in cattle and calves. The industry contributes more than $70 billion to our economy and over 250,000 jobs to Kansans. That is a whopping 13% of our state's workforce. In 2020, we exported over $4 billion in goods worldwide. That's the first time exports have passed the $4 billion mark since 2014. Terrific accomplishment. But as with any industry, agricultural excellence starts with our people. Over the past 2 years, I have visited farms and agribusinesses all over the state. A dairy farm in Junction City, a feed yard in Garden City, a processing plant in Holcomb, a cow-calf operation in Linden, a rye seed dealer near Healy, to mention just a few. Ag businesses are among my favorite places to tour, and not just because of the casual dress code or the occasional free samples. Farmers are scientists, they're mechanics, they're veterinarians, accountants, and business operators. At every visit, owners never fail to impress me with their wisdom, their determination, and their kindness. all carrying on the traditions of generations of farmers before them who have worked this land since before Kansas became a state. Through it all, farmers have overcome untold adversity, droughts and flooding, fluctuating commodity markets and trade agreements, global pandemics. Challenge after challenge, you have persevered. I'm with you today to acknowledge and thank you for what you do for Kansas. It's not just the jobs you provide or the economic contribution to our state. You stepped up to keep the food supply chain running as the virus spread, creating fear and uncertainty. You continued to feed families across the state, across the country, and across the globe. So on behalf of all Kansans, I thank you. As we, excuse me, hopefully return to normal over the next year, please know that you have a partner in my administration. Since I took office, I've supported farmers, ranchers, and producers. I was the first and only Democratic governor to support the United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. During the pandemic, my administration invested nearly $12 million in grants to over 250 Kansas ag-related businesses. Agribusinesses and nonprofits across Kansas use those grants to reshape their business models. They've changed how they interact with customers by expanding online services or in-person delivery and finding innovative ways to expand capacity. It's that kind of strategic thinking that I've come to expect from a group of people who have innovated their way around every obstacle ever thrown at them. But I want to be clear, our partnership isn't just about the agricultural industry or the food supply chain. It's a commitment from me to address the unique issues facing our rural and farming communities. That's why I created the Office of Rural Prosperity. The office is spearheading a dedicated and ongoing effort to energize and revitalize rural Kansas. Through ORP, we heard directly from rural Kansans what prosperity means to them, about their unique struggles and needs, access to housing, broadband development, quality, affordable healthcare, creating jobs, bringing in new businesses, and bolstering established rural industries and workforce development. I know that when our rural communities succeed, our farmers, our ranchers, and our producers succeed. That's why we continue fighting to expand Medicaid and support our small town hospitals, because if they go under, so does the viability of the communities they serve. We're making sure every kid has access to a quality education. By fully funding education for the third year in a row, we're protecting per pupil funding dollars that rural school districts depend upon. We're also growing our state's economic development tools to recruit and retain businesses. By restarting programs like Main Street, we're creating jobs and bringing businesses back to small towns and cities, all while prioritizing the restoration and preservation of unique historic downtown business districts. But true business growth is about more than the tools in our economic development toolbox. For our agriculture industry in particular, good and safe roads are essential for hauling agricultural products from farm to table. Through my administration's Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program, or better known as IKE, we're making progress. IKE includes the Short Line Rail Improvement Program, a staple for our ag community. This year, we've invested more than $7 million in 10 short line rail projects. These are projects that will enhance our ability to move Kansas-grown grains to new and expanded markets. It'll speed up grain delivery and proactively react to changing market demands. It will directly and indirectly create jobs, and it will cause less wear and tear on Kansas highways. As every farmer knows, infrastructure isn't just about roads, bridges, or rails. Broadband access has been an overlooked problem. We know broadband is a game changer, particularly for rural and underserved areas of our state. Broadband connectivity can close the equity gap between communities and bridge the urban-rural divide. It'll improve access to healthcare through telehealth services. It'll allow our kids to access virtual school. It'll ensure businesses can compete and thrive in an increasingly digitally focused economy. Empower state-of-the-art farming technology. Last year, I created the Office of Broadband Development to develop broadband expansion strategies. We included $85 million for broadband deployment in the IKE program. That's the first time in Kansas history that state funds have been specifically dedicated to expanding high-speed internet access. We invested $10 million in broadband deployment through the Broadband Acceleration Grant Program. And we're just getting started. We won't stop until every home, every business has access to reliable, high-speed internet. While we have a lot of work left to do, there's no doubt we've made progress and that Kansas is on the right path. I will continue to work with rural and agricultural stakeholders to support communities from Johnson City to Johnson County. Thank you all again for your contributions to our state. Best of luck for a successful summit. Take care. Hope to see you in person next year.
Thank you so much, Governor. I might add those initiatives and priorities are quite consistent with the findings of the sectors that met prior and what that we'll touch on at the end of the session. So we are excited about the future and appreciate you joining us this morning.
Very welcome. Take care.
Thank you. You know, another key relationship that contributes to creating opportunities for growth in Kansas agriculture is the United States Department of Agriculture. We are fortunate this year to have a greeting from the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, Thomas Vilsack. Secretary Vilsack was confirmed in February, but he's no stranger. He was previously served 8 years in that role. Originally from Pennsylvania, Secretary Vilsack has spent much of his life in Iowa, where he served 2 terms as governor. Prior to returning to USDA, he spent 4 years as president and CEO of the U.S. Dairy Export Council. Secretary Vilsack was unable to join us in person, but he sent a recorded message of welcome and a few minutes of discussion on one of the most important issues that we'll be discussing today.
Welcome to the 2021 Governor's Ag Summit, and I want to thank Governor Laura Kelly for hosting this important event. I appreciate the opportunity to share a few words with you today, especially as you discuss how agriculture can and should play a role in addressing climate change. Producers across the country are experiencing the climate crisis firsthand, from rising temperatures and heat waves to early snow melt and low rainfall to flooding events. In Kansas, farmers are grappling with the effects of climate change on their production systems through increasing frequency, duration, and severity of drought, as well as more extreme and intense rainfall events and shifting seasonal weather patterns. Flash and extended droughts affect agriculture, especially those areas that rely on surface and groundwater supplies, such as the Ogallala Aquifer. Wheat production will be affected by longer, hotter growing seasons, increased extreme weather events, including droughts and late spring frosts. Warmer, drier springs lead to reduced seed filling and yields. More extreme rainfall events will drive soil loss and erosion. Shifts in participation patterns may increase forage production in the summer. However, this new growth is also fuel for possible wildfires later in the season. Heat stress from increasing temperatures can negatively affect cattle performance, and increasing temperature variability can exacerbate respiratory problems in calves in both feedlots and wheat pastures. To some extent, farmers and the USDA are already prepared for some of these challenges and have some tools to help mitigate, manage, and weather them. Public-private partnerships of the Federal Crop Insurance Program and the USDA Disaster Response and Recovery Programs clearly help farmers and ranchers facing natural disasters. And our conservation programs provide options to help plant and maintain cover to slow erosion or improve irrigation efficiency. Even without the federal programs, many producers are already following what we have begun to label as climate-smart agriculture, whether it's no-till, cover crops, or rotational grazing. But as we see more frequent, more severe, and even long-term shifts in weather patterns, these tools can get overwhelmed or expose gaps. Beyond more and better tools, I think there will be even newer opportunities for our farmers, the original stewards of the land, to create new income streams and markets and be the core part of our country's approach to climate change. Under the Biden-Harris administration, USDA is engaged in a whole-of-government effort to combat the climate crisis and conserve and protect our nation's lands, biodiversity, and natural resources, including our precious soil, air, and water. We're very focused on putting food and agriculture and forestry at the heart of this administration's efforts to tackle climate change by offering climate-smart solutions that are producer and market-focused. The President and the White House believe that food, agriculture, and forestry will play and should play a major role in addressing climate change. Across the U.S., 97% of the land is in rural areas. Most of that land is either privately owned, with adjacencies to federal programming, or federally owned and managed. This provides an opportunity to use USDA's expertise in conservation, science, and research, and the passion and commitment of agricultural producers to put the United States in a leadership position on climate change mitigation. We see this as a market opportunity and as a job opportunity as well. As you know, those making their living from the land, our farmers, ranchers, and forest owners and producers, are bearing the brunt of climate change. USDA is taking a close look at new opportunities to implement opportunities across the board to encourage the voluntary adoption of climate-smart agriculture and forestry practices that reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and put agriculture at the heart of tackling climate change. Back in the spring, we issued and put out a report on USDA's climate-smart agriculture and forest strategy. We're now working to build it out, incorporating all of the public input we've received from numerous hearings and outreach. We're going to build out our climate-smart agriculture and forestry strategy and provide it to producers, forest owners, and landowners across the country. And that strategy is going to include a multi-pronged approach that covers research, outreach and education, conservation incentives for farmers, foresters, through existing programs, and support of new and emerging markets for carbon benefits generated by the agriculture sector. We'll need to strengthen our domestic and international markets for commodities produced in climate-friendly ways, ensuring that farmers benefit from these new market opportunities. And this is what consumers want. We'll pay a special attention to include access by small, disadvantaged, and beginning farmers and ranchers, in addition to those early adopters who have paved the way and demonstrated the benefits of agricultural conservation and climate-smart agricultural practices. We know that our farmers are indeed the best stewards of our land, and farmers and landowners want to reduce the impact of climate change on their business and their way of life. We especially recognize that our agricultural producers play a critical role in fostering a healthy environment through those climate-smart management practices that conserve natural resources, build healthier soils, sequester carbon, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In Kansas, producers are building resilience to challenges by developing drought plans, incorporating more drought-tolerant seed varieties, and/or adopting soil conservation practices to combat extreme weather events. Information on animal genetics, nutrition, and management can provide farmers and ranchers the tools they need to manage their cattle operations in this changing climate. Prescribed fire may also reduce fuel load, while also improving grazing conditions and controlling invasive species. This is where USDA must and wants to be a partner. We have a critical role to play in ensuring farmers have the tools they need to respond to conditions in the short term and to adapt their production systems in the long term. In the months ahead, USDA will serve as a leader in research and conservation tools to support producers in building resiliencies across their operations and mitigating the impacts and effects of flooding, drought, wildfire, and other climate-related disaster events. USDA's Southern Plains Climate Hub is already working with partners to develop and deliver science-based, region-specific information and technologies to producers to build climate resilience. The Southern Plains Climate Hub has led efforts to encourage risk reduction measures, future wildfires, and to develop recovery and preparedness efforts across the Southern Plains. We know that to successfully meet the challenges brought on by climate, we need to pursue a coordinated approach. And that to be effective, we must work together with farmers, ranchers, landowners. And we must work for those farmers, ranchers, and landowners. And we're going to continue to build upon our producers' efforts to support climate-smart agriculture now and into the future. And we're committed to being a partner so that farmers and ranchers can continue to provide food and fiber and fuel to the United States and beyond while creating rural economic stability in communities across the nation. I want to thank you for your commitment in discussing these issues today and for the important and necessary role that you all play in our nation's future as we tackle climate crisis. I want to thank you as well for the opportunity to share a few words, and I wish you a meaningful and a productive conference and event.
Well, we are most thankful that he sent this message, and I know from visiting with their offices that he is looking forward to the opportunity to come to Kansas, hopefully in the near future, and we will welcome that opportunity. And Secretary Vilsack indicated our state's farmers and ranchers and landowners do play a critical role in efforts that are taking place to face climate-related changes. The coordinated approach to work together and build on future efforts will be increasingly important in the coming years. And we appreciate the USDA's acknowledgement that many people are already adopting practices aimed at increased conservation and stewardship of the land here in the state. And today we'll be talking in more detail about soil health for our farms and ranches. This discussion about carbon sequestration is next on our agenda and will be led by Andrew Lyon, who is the director of our Division of Conservation. He will introduce the guest speakers who are joining us today. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Andy.
Thank you, Secretary Bean. We believe that we have a very important and based on Secretary Vilsack's remarks, a very timely panel discussion today on climate smart agriculture and ecosystem service markets. We are pleased to have three experts join us today on the panel whose work has and will continue to shape the development of ecosystem service markets. Dr. Charles Rice is a professor of soil microbiology in the agronomy department at Kansas State University. Dr. Rice's research focuses on soil quality, carbon cycling, and climate change. Dr. Rice was a co-winner of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize for his work with the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Jason Weller is president of Truterra LLC, the sustainability business of Land O'Lakes, where he leads the team providing natural resource sustainability and agricultural production solutions for the cooperative's members and owners. Jason previously served as chief of the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. Debbie Reed is the executive director of the Ecosystem Services Market Consortium. The ESMC is a member-based organization launching a national scale ecosystem services market for agriculture to recognize and reward farmers and ranchers for their environmental services to society. Debbie's role in leading the ESMC builds on her decades of experience in agriculture, climate change mitigation, and sustainability efforts at the national and international scale. Debbie, can you please start us off today by giving some background on the consortium and bring us up to speed on your latest work?
Thanks, Andy, and thanks everyone for the invitation. And I really appreciate the introductory remarks, not only by Governor Kelly, but Secretary Beam and Deputy Secretary Olson and Tom Vilsack, because I think it speaks to the challenges the industry is facing. ESMC, we are a member-based consortium of members across the agricultural supply chain and value chain. We have over 80 members currently, which include corporations in the food and beverage sector, as well as all major agricultural production groups, land grant universities, as well as research scientists and others, and environmental NGOs. And we are launching a national scale ecosystem service market intended to pay farmers and ranchers for the outcomes that society and corporates and governments are demanding from the sector. We started our endeavor in 2017, and we're launching our program at the national scale next September. But currently we have 20 projects across the country, across all major agricultural production systems and regions, in which we are literally refining our entire business model, generating credits, paying farmers and ranchers for them, and meeting the needs of corporates who have demands in this space. We have built our program both according to the needs of these companies, but also engage farmers and ranchers in every aspect of our development to ensure that the program works for farmers and ranchers as well. ESMC, we're a nonprofit. We are literally an enabling environment for corporations to help meet their needs and their commitments, but not have to make all of the investment in the infrastructure and building of a program that works for the agricultural sector. We are also innovative, and we were the first program to actually generate credits for not just soil carbon and reduced greenhouse gas, but water quality, water quantity, and biodiversity, because any action or systems change that farmers and ranchers undertake on their farms and ranches generates multiple benefits. We think it's incredibly important to quantify that and to evaluate it and provide those monetized credits, if you will, to sectors where there is huge demand. So that's an overview of how we operate across the country.
That's fantastic, Deb. Thank you very much. Jason, can you please give us some background on how Land O'Lakes developed the Truterra system and talk about how the Truterra Insights engine works?
Morning, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. And I really appreciate the invitation, Secretary Beam, Deputy Secretary Olson. Really thank you for hosting this event and for including Land O'Lakes and Truterra specifically in this panel discussion around how we help farmers advance their soil health and ultimately help them connect to new market opportunities. As Andrew introduced, I previously had worked for USDA and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So it was great to hear Secretary Vilsack again position both the scientific expertise and the programmatic potential of USDA's multifold agencies and how they work with Kansan producers on advancing their crop and production success. Land O'Lakes is one of the largest farmer-owned and retailer-owned cooperative systems in the United States. We're actually a federated cooperative system of ag retailers, and Truterra, the sustainability business at Land O'Lakes in this federated co-op system, works with a number of ag retailers in Kansas. These retailers include Central Valley Ag, Ottawa Co-op, Alliance Ag and Grain, a Grant Bend Co-op. And these cooperative systems, these retailers have great teams of agronomists and precision ag specialists that go out and work with Kansan producers on advancing their agronomy results. And with Truterra, we partner with those ag retailers, and with the Truterra Insights Engine, which is our precision data platform, our precision conservation platform, we help farmers and their ag retailer advisor, their agronomy advisor, bring additional insights onto the health of their soils and in the profitability opportunities on their fields and their cropping operations. So we gather the data off the field and from the farmer, and then in return, we can give back insights for the farmer on erosion, on greenhouse gas emissions, on carbon and organic matter trends, and ultimately give them tools to help select practices that will ultimately advance their soil health success and outcomes. But we're also excited because we've launched this year a proof of concept project on carbon credits. So we actually have a partner company that right now is interested in purchasing from farmers services. And these services include removing carbon from the atmosphere and storing it back in the soil through photosynthesis. So we are partnering with a number of Kansan farmers and through those ag retailers that I mentioned and connecting them to this marketplace opportunity. But it's really important that, yes, carbon credits are a really interesting opportunity to increase revenue and to diversify the portfolio of revenue for a farm. But really, it starts with good farming practices. It really has to be anchored in the concepts of soil health management systems and include really good nutrient management, great crop protection strategies, and ultimately good soil management strategies. And if you get those good agronomic practices in place and you're able to document those results, and I think we'll be talking about that during the panel today, we then can ultimately help the farmer bring to market a new class of commodities, a second crop, in this case, a carbon crop. And we're on the very early frontier of this new marketplace. It's kind of messy, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of insights in today's panel discussion on what that messiness looks like. But I'm really personally excited, and we really see a lot of upside potential for agriculture. And this is a great discussion, and I really credit the team here in Kansas for bringing this up and leading off today's agri-growth conference with this topic. So thank you.
Absolutely, Jason. Thank you very much for being here today. Dr. Rice, can you please provide an overview of your research and work on soil health and climate change, and talk about perhaps how attitudes towards these topics has changed over time?
Oh, sure. Again, thanks, Andrew, for moderating this discussion, and Secretary Beam and Deputy Secretary Olson for organizing this panel. It's pretty timely. So my research is focused on, well, research and outreach is focused on a couple different things. One, I've been doing carbon nitrogen cycling since I've been here at K-State for over 30 years. But we've been looking at what practices can improve soil health, improve carbon content in the soils. And so we have a 32-year experiment that's been going on since I arrived here, looking at no-till and synthetic fertilizer and compost. We just recently finished, or we're in the process of finishing up, a carbon and soil health across the state of Kansas, looking at native prairie across the precipitation gradient, as well as different ag sites, and both tilled ag sites and then some improved ag practices such as no-till and cover crops. We're in the process of summarizing that. I guess on the outreach side, well, research and outreach side, we thankfully, due to Kansas corn funding, we have 4 sites in Kansas, in the central and eastern Kansas, to look at replicated strips to how they improve carbon and soil health. That's been going on for 3 years, and hopefully another couple years. We will be adding 3 more sites from a USDA grant that was funded to look at soil health, but also, as Secretary Vilsack mentioned, how do we increase resiliency for climate and increase water efficiency and nitrogen efficiency in wheat-based systems in Oklahoma and Kansas. We have a trial of 17 different rotations to look at predictive and different strategies for soil health, carbon, and resiliency. So that's kind of an overview of what we've been doing. I've also been working with Debbie decades, I guess, on different, how much carbon we can store in soils, but also how do you measure and monitor carbon, and then now soil health. So I think, the markets back in the 90s, late 90s and early 2000s, we're going to date Debbie and I, but they were there, went away, and now they're coming back, and so there's new opportunities. And again, the question is, how do you measure, monitor, and verify some of those carbon that the farmers have stored in their soils and get some value out of that?
Thank you, Chuck. And yeah, we actually, from our ranch in the mid-2000s, had some of those carbon credits. I've framed them, put them in a nice frame on the wall. They're not worth the paper they're printed on, but we've got them. Jason, you touched on soil health and the Terra Insights engine. Can you talk a little bit about what those practices are that, when we talk about improving soil health, sequestering carbon, and trying to create this fair and equitable marketplace to value these credits, but just dig in a little bit. What are we really talking about with those practices?
So simplistically, and you hear a lot of organizations and different programs focus predominantly on minimizing disturbance of the soil. So looking at conservation tillage systems and maximizing biomass in the system. So predominantly the shorthand people will talk about are cover crops. How do you add a cover crop in the fallow periods? And while those are, I think, are necessary and in good starting positions, I think what gets lost is the actual surrounding agronomy that makes those systems successful. So the way we approach the conversation on soil health with a farmer is looking at, it's a multifold approach, and it's a system that really needs to be of supporting practices. It looks at, the four basic principles or concepts that USDA have developed around disturbance, minimizing disturbance, around maximizing diversity of the living roots and the diversity of the crop systems, about keeping the soil covered, and then maximizing, I guess, the diversity of the crops. And so with the four-factor approach, we holistically look at the conservation tillage systems that are in place. And so that, as farmers will know, there's a huge range of what constitutes conservation tillage. And when we work with a farmer, we're not advocating that every acre has to be or must be into a no-till system. This can include strip till or different ridge till systems, or looking at the necessary tillage operations that are appropriate with the crop. So we're not advocating for a never till system, though we recommend that minimum tillage or low intensity tillage is part of this overall system. It also has to include looking at the crop rotation, looking for crop diversity. So not having necessarily just a monoculture or corn on corn system, which I know is less predominant in Kansas, but looking at a more diverse rotation through the full cycle of the rotation in the fields. In the fallow months, looking at, it could be cover crop. It could also be a second cash crop, which I know some producers in Kansas do take advantage of. So it's really looking at keeping the soils covered and having a living crop in the soils as long as possible, part of that system. But what often gets lost in this also is looking at not just the quality soil management, it's also the quality nutrient management. And too often that gets lost in the conversation with producers. And sometimes farmers are not planning appropriately for the nitrogen cycling, what is going to be residual nitrogen and phosphorus and other macronutrients and micronutrients that are going to be part of in their soils post-harvest, or planning into using a cover crop cocktail, understanding what your nitrogen and phosphorus and nutrient management strategy is going to be to help that cover crop be successful, to get established, but then also understanding what the residue in that cover crop is going to leave behind and hopefully have available for the following cash crop. And then I would add to that quality crop protection as well. And too often producers get into these systems and without having a strategy or plan to address the various vectors, both really disease, but I think weed is a big pressure a lot of producers face in some of these systems. And so through our agronomy program, we look holistically at how do we set up a quality soil health system for the producer, benchmarking the conditions in their field, coming up with a recommendation that meets the needs of that field based on soil, based on the farmer's objectives from production, and then helping the farmer ease into these systems. It's not just a cold start where you have to go from a conventional system into a holistic regenerative or soil health production system. A lot of times it requires you to take a 2 or 3 or 4 year transition in these systems and slowly adopt these practices, and do so with the advice of an expert, an agronomy advisor, or someone who's been practiced in helping the farmer detect what's happening and head off of the past early problems, but also help in after harvest assess what progressed and where there are other additional opportunities to add new practices into the system.
Yeah, that's great, Jason. And I really agree with you on the need to take a holistic approach. It's just absolutely crucial. I do want to mention to everyone that who will or would like to have questions from the audience, please use your chat function, or you can also raise your hand virtually, of course, and we will try to make sure that your questions get directed to the proper panelists. Dr. Rice, to follow up a little bit on Jason's description of these soil health management systems, can you give us some examples of specific instances here in the state of Kansas on how producers can integrate these management practices into our predominant production systems?
Sure, Andrew. Yeah, Jason I highlighted those, my starting point is minimum, least disturbance, and, no-till is the ultimate, no disturbance or very minimal disturbance. So starting with that, any sort of tillage, where we've been adding, this is a practice where we've been adding compost, we lose 30 to 50% of our carbon just as a result of even conservation tillage, chisel disc. So as whether it's strip till or no-till, that's really important. And then Jason pointed out that it's really taking next steps to intensify and diversify those systems. So adding cover crops. In some places in Kansas, we can go to a double crop system, wheat, soybean, or wheat, milo systems. And no-till, what it does is it conserves that water. And so then you're able to then plant the double crop, and you can plant right after harvesting, which saves time and saves water. And then the next step, a lot of producers in Kansas are starting to now graze that cover crops to add economic value. And instead, there's value in the cover crops itself to the soil, but then adding a grazing component to that. And that means integrating crop livestock systems. So it's a stepwise process, but Jason made the point that it's not just no-till, okay? You gotta change your system. You gotta change your fertility program, your weed management program, crop rotations. That's really absolutely key to think about of a systematic approach. We need to be rotating our crops, but we also need to be rotating our herbicide. That's one of the reasons why we have herbicide resistant weeds, is that we use the same herbicide every year, and then that speed ups evolution selection. And so that's why we have some of the problems now that we have. So it's really, rotating the crops and the herbicides to combat those weed issues. But the starting point is minimal disturbance, and then trying to add as much crop living roots, crop diversity into that system. And so we're lucky in Kansas that we have a lot of different crops. Iowa's like corn, soybean, that's not not being too critical, but where we have milo, we have soybeans, we have cotton, we have alfalfa. There's lots of different crops that we can bring into the rotation. And again, the alfalfa, the perennials are excellent because they, of course, you're not tilling, but also you're providing deep roots and sequestering carbon at deeper levels into the soil.
Yeah, that's very true, Dr. Rice. And, I would add that with the mosaic landscape that we have in Kansas, with our perennial grasslands, our row crops, we also have a tremendous opportunity to integrate livestock back into what has traditionally been row crop acres. And that, again, can be a real benefit, both environmentally and economically, to these soil health management systems. So a lot of opportunity to intensify and diversify those cropping systems. Debbie, we had a question come in, and I'm gonna kind of work it into one of my questions as well. Callahan Grund asks about the auditing process, but I wonder if you could start just a little bit earlier and talk about the quantification metrics that you're developing, how those are evolving, and then what type of auditing and what type of record keeping do producers need to be on the lookout for here in the near future. It's just our thinking that these markets are most efficient when there's transparency in the rules of the marketplace, but also the prices, and the quantification plays a huge part.
Yes, thanks, Andy, for asking. So the market rules do require certain verification approaches. We refer to it as verification, not auditing. I think it's essentially the same. But it starts with when a farmer and rancher enrolls in our program, and most market programs, they do document their baseline, their starting point, if you will, as well as changes in their production systems that will create improvements in soil carbon, net greenhouse gases, water quality, water quantity, biodiversity. That data does need to be captured at basically the farm and ranch scale for quantification. So it is captured in the system. The way we quantify credits is actually model-based for most of the greenhouse gases and for the water assets. For soil carbon, we have integrated quantification approaches that requires both soil testing at baseline and probably every 5 to 10 years. We're waiting for the rules to be finalized on that right now, probably by September. So we do integrated sampling for soil carbon, and we model. We use greenhouse gas models, and then for the water, we use a different water quality model. The modeling results basically also have to be captured in the system because they are part of the verification process. So after we quantify outcomes based on individual farms or ranches, all of that is captured in our system, which includes satellite imagery to track like changes in practices. We've invested in a technologically advanced MRV system, monitoring, reporting, verification, so that we can both drop the costs and the burdens on producers and verifiers. So if the more we capture in our system, they can go and look at it and not have to go out to the farm. That is where huge costs in auditing or verification come up. We are working with third-party certification and verification bodies, Gold Standard and Sustained Cert, and they are partners taking on the verification approaches and certifying the credits before they are sold. We actually have incorporated that into our business model. So we are responsible for all of that work. And that is like the enabling condition environment that we bring to this process, so that the producers are not responsible, the buyers are not responsible, right? We kind of package all of that up. Right now, we have a, for the verification itself. So we're trying to enable the auditors to see everything they need to see. They have been calling our producers to confirm, you did in fact do this, right? The systems changes that they have indicated need to occur. So that is the way our verification approach is currently set up. Again, trying to minimize the impact and the burden on producers, but ensure that the credits are credible and have integrity according to market standards. One thing I'd like to point out, our first project was actually in Kansas with about 95 wheat growers, and the buyers for that, for the carbon are General Mills, and for the water, it's the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. It's a really exciting project for us and program, and one in which we're seeing great success, both integrating the requirements of the producers, the verification process, and then meeting the needs of these corporates. So, and Andy, you've been one of our contacts on that. So thanks for your work on that.
Absolutely, Debbie. I think that this is cutting edge science that you're dealing with, and your ability and ESMC's ability to translate that for farmers and ranchers and make it to where we can understand and build trust in the marketplace, I think is absolutely critical. So I commend your work to do just that. We did have another question come in on the chat, and from Bruce Manga, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here, Bruce, but I won't ask for any recommendations from you, but can any of our panelists today just talk generally about some of the different types of additives, different types of I hate to use the terminology, but kind of bug in a jug type of soil amendments, anything like that. What are some of the general thoughts that you have, without getting too specific on any one product?
I could start. So there are different products that can enhance nitrogen utilization efficiency, for instance, or improve soil carbon, or even reduce methane, like feed additives that can reduce methane from these systems. As long as you can quantify those outcomes in a way that meets the verifier's needs and the certification body's needs, which takes literally peer-reviewed research data, then those are applicable in our market, and I think probably in any market. You just need to have the data to show the outcomes associated with those products. We have a lot of those products being utilized in our systems, and we're pretty agnostic as to their use, right? As long as, again, we can quantify them and their outcomes. We see a lot of growth in feed additives, for instance, for cattle, both dairy and beef cattle being utilized to reduce methane. And I think these new tools and technologies are really exciting. The costs of some of them currently are very high, right? And so I think over time we'll see those costs drop. And currently most farmers and ranchers don't have a reason to utilize them unless they can capture those economic and ecological outcomes, right, in the market. So hopefully the market will stimulate the use more. But I think it's huge progress and new opportunities for producers.
Just building upon what Debbie outlined and I think expertly summarized, we as well are looking holistically. For example, we have a supply chain program we're working with our dairy members on. And this is when our dairy foods business. So for Land O'Lakes, of course, the audience probably knows we're a dairy company. We're celebrating our 100th anniversary as a dairy co-op, and we're a branded food company. And so we have global dairy customers that are interested in decarbonizing their milk supply chain. Simplistically, when we think about a dairy farm, there are sort of three principal pathways for greenhouse gas impact. There's the silage and feed acres. So it's the CO2 and the methane and the N2O, the nitrous oxide that emits from the silage and feed acres, or the carbon that could be sequestered in the soils on those acres. And then there's the enteric emissions from the cow itself. When the cow burps, it emits methane. And then there's the methane that's emitted from the manure. And so when we think holistically, like for example, on the dairy operation, which would be analogous to a livestock operation, we're looking at what are different technologies. In addition to the soil health practices that Dr. Rice summarized, we're also looking at what are other crop inputs or additives that can be part of the system to minimize the risk of loss of these gases to the environment. So it can be stabilizers on the nitrogen and on the phosphorus. It can be stabilizers on the manure to reduce emissions. It can be feed additives into the cow to reduce enteric emissions. There are actually additives you can include in the manure to reduce emissions or to reduce volatilization. And there's a whole range of crop inputs that can be part of the system to reduce or slow down the rate of loss to make sure these nutrients are available for the crop as opposed to oxidizing and being emitted in the atmosphere. So we too are agnostic. They just have to be peer-reviewed science. It has to be credible. Field repeatable trials. We're not going to go out and recommend products that we don't believe work in a real world environment, but also don't add economic and production value to the farmer. We're not going to be recommending products that we believe would have a negative economic impact for a farm.
And that's a pretty good setup then there, Dr. Rice. I won't put you on the spot about any particular research that's ongoing, but just generally, is there research occurring on some of these products?
Yeah, we're actually doing some research on some of the bioinoculants in soils. I guess in general, and when I teach class, the bug in a jug that you apply for broadly across the field, generally it doesn't work as well. You got to remember there's a billion different microorganisms in a teaspoon of soil. And if that soil is not healthy, adding a few hundred microbes are not going to survive or make a difference in general. So you got to start with, good healthy soils anyway. Where the potential is more the rhizosphere. It's a niche. It's around that root where those microbes that you're adding outside the soil environment can survive because it's a carbon nutrient-rich environment specifically around that root. So there are some products being developed. There's actually some serious money now being invested by startups on, for example, nitrogen fixation in corn and wheat on the roots, inoculants. We'll see. We're actually testing some of those. Mycorrhizal fungi is another one that lives on the root to help phosphorus uptake. Again, it's that root rhizosphere that has a better chance of success. If you asked me 5 or 10 years ago, I would have said, I was kind of downgrading all those, but now there's some serious money and some new technologies that it shows a lot more in promise. But again, the better chance of success is around that root rice-fair. And then there are other products like, for methane, for digesters and feed additives, that again, it's a specific niche that you're trying to fill.
That's great to hear that there's ongoing research on these products, because that'll, help us get those to market much sooner. So Debbie, as we look to the future, what are some of the next steps that we think exist in developing these ecosystem service markets?
Oh, I will say, so Chuck alluded to this. We've been working together in this environment for 30 years. Yes, Chuck, it's been that long. And I'll say, I have seen more activity in this space in the past 3 years than in 30 years. And it's a lot of reasons. And I think the introductory speaker spoke a lot to that, right? We are in fact facing some of the anthropogenic impacts of climate change, first and foremost hitting farmers and ranchers, right? And so I think the urgency has been stepped up from countries and corporates. When Chuck and I started working on this, most of the work was coming from countries who had taken obligations to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. Since 2015, and then highly steps up since 2018, corporations have done exactly the same. They've done their greenhouse gas inventories and they figured out where and how to reduce their emissions. That is a game changer. And that I think will only continue. I had done an analysis, I think in 2019, about the number of corporates who have taken on those greenhouse gas inventories and obligations. It has increased 75% since then, right? So the demand side is a game changer. And I think you will continue to see that. I think the other thing, there are now lots of international organizations looking at the credibility and the integrity of credits, because buyers and investors really need assurance that what they're buying, they won't be accused of greenwashing or anything else. You're going to see a lot of change there and much more focused attention. The last thing that I think is starting to happen, this already exists in Europe, but is starting to happen in the United States, is some sort of not only link to the financial risk of a company who is not undertaking practices, right, but legal implications. There are cases in Europe. So the SEC is looking at, do companies need to file their annual reports of what they're doing? And should someone be looking at the integrity of those reports for accuracy, if you will? That requirement already exists in Europe. And there's a case in which a company is being sued for their report by another company who invested in them and said, your report was inaccurate. You overstated the outcomes of what you're doing, and they're being sued. That has global ramifications for these reports in the future. And I think we already see within our membership, corporations much more interested in ensuring the integrity of their actual reports. So, great demand, a lot of implications for, that I think how in fact these companies are sourcing their credits. All good, I think, for the agricultural sector.
Yeah, Debbie, I think the trust portion that you spoke to there is just absolutely critical. We touched on it numerous times. But Dr. Rice, that leads me into, I think, an interesting question. To build that trust and to have that backing, we need the research to follow along and to prove these outcomes. How can farmers and ranchers in Kansas get involved or follow along with the current research that's in progress to make sure that they are keeping themselves best informed as possible?
Yeah, well, I guess the onus is on us at K-State, or at least in Kansas, to get that information out. Of course, research takes some time, and then we need to get it out in a more timely manner. But one of the key things, like I mentioned earlier, is we have this Kansas Soil Health Partnership, where we have 4 sites, and we're going to be adding more. So a combination of field days, extension outreach material. One of my students is developing a soil health series. I've been working with TNC to develop kind of analysis of different carbon protocols markets. So I guess we need to get that out, but we are doing on the ground, not only our research at the farm here in Manhattan, but we are doing farmer field research, and that's really key. We're having, actually we got one field day coming up next week, September 2nd at Justin Knopf's farm, and demonstrating, looking at some of those soil health practices. I'm going to be talking about carbon markets, and so and there's going to be a farmer panel there, so we can, as Jason said, that learn from other farmers what those practices are that's working for them, or what's not working for them. So trying to keep up with the research, getting that outreach, getting connected with a soil health partnership would be important.
And I would add, Dr. Rice, we have fairly recently seen the creation of the Kansas Soil Health Alliance. So a number of entities are working through the alliance. I wholeheartedly agree with you with the opportunities on those workshops and field days. The alliance is trying to keep a comprehensive list of all of those soil health education opportunities that are taking place across the state. So I would put a plug in there to speak with your local conservation districts, and also to check out the website for the Kansas Soil Health Alliance. We're also monitoring the chat. I think we've had some additional questions come in. Dana, would you like to maybe ask some of the very good questions we've had on the chat, please?
You bet. Thanks, Andy. We have about 7 minutes left in this session. So the first question I would like to direct to Jason, and then throw over to Dr. Rice after that. You guys have talked a great deal about how things are going and research and working with some producers along the way. But can you tell us a little bit more about the how? Is there really, some clear starting points to work with producers on how a carbon market can and would work? So Jason, if you would want to start, and then Dr. Rice, I know you've talked about some field days, but like I said, we've just got a few minutes, but can you just help us and our attendees on getting that initial how?
Wow, I'll try and be brief. That's like even that's multiple cocktails and a full evening session right there. There's a lot of programs that are out now available. If anything, I think it's a confusing space for a lot of farmers. There's a lot of literature, there's a lot of trade press, there's a lot of prospecting, frankly, that's going on. There's a lot of entrants and companies that are now in this carbon credit marketplace. And so, we suggest that producers ask some basic questions when they meet with an organization, and really start with trying to understand what's this organization that's talking to me about carbon credits or carbon exchanges. Really, what's their agenda? What's their bottom line motive? And I think there are a lot of great organizations. I'd say 3 are on today's panel. I think their motives are very pure and very, very good for agriculture and very good for farmers. But I think it's just something that farmers are very practiced at detecting the underlying motive and the agenda of why this entity or this person is visiting me throughout trying to purchase my carbon. But there are also a lot of, I think, specific questions farmers should ask, and they don't have to be necessarily technical, but really understanding some basic commitments. Like, what are the practices that qualify? What's the time commitment that I'm agreeing to be in this program? And sometimes this whole issue of a carbon credit, the buyer of that credit wants some assurance that that carbon is going to be in the ground for a long time. And for a lot of buyers, by a long time, they mean forever. So it's tough for a farmer to commit to, 5 or 10 years, let alone 20 or 100 years, right? So these are long-term commitments, and just understanding what's this time commitment or expectation for performance. And then what's the contingency plan? Because as farmers know, agriculture happens, right? Weather, pest, disease, markets, like there just needs to be some flexibility for in a working landscape. What are the contingencies, or what's my availability to adapt and make practice change? Who owns my data? What's the payment plan? What additional strings are attached? There's a lot of this, just I think questions farmers are very practiced at asking when they get into kind of a crop inputs sales or marketing, marketing livestock, marketing grain. So this is similar. You're marketing a commodity, you're marketing a product, another crop. And so when you're talking to the buyer, really trying to understand the buyer's motives and what's the contractual requirements. Final thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to the other panelists, is just begin the journey with who you trust. There's some great organizations on this call today. You know, Truterra, we work with great ag retailers in Kansas who have the bottom line economic interest of the farmer in mind as themselves as farmer co-ops. And so we are partnering in the state of Kansas with great organizations to try and build awareness, build capacity to help Kansan producers start to ask these questions to get real solid answers on where to begin their journey. But it is a journey, and I think it requires farmers asking critical questions.
Yeah, I'll just quickly jump in here, and there's two points. One is who's responsible for the monitoring and verification is really critical. You know, the farmer shouldn't be responsible because that could be a high cost depending on the verification. The other, I guess, would to start off, I would just do really good record keeping of yield maps, because that's the plant materials, the carbon getting into the soil. So yield maps, input data, when you started tillage, if you can verify, you know, some of these programs go back 3-5 years to give prior carbon. Some others start time zero. But getting some of that record keeping and yield maps would be helpful.
Great.
Thank you. The opportunity there to maybe touch on that as well with just a little bit of time left.
Great. We have one other question, Amy, that came in, and Blade, thank you for that question. And it looks like there's field days for you to be able to attend to get more information with that. Debbie, I want to turn this last question over to you. We just have 2 minutes left in our session with this. So you've been in this for a long time with Dr. Rice and others. The question came in, is there a fear of invalidating full credits?
Yeah, it's a good question. Most programs don't do that. In the California cap and trade system, they have a practice of invalidating credits after the fact. I don't know of any other system in the world that does that. Right? I think it's an issue, and I think it's why they haven't had a lot of traction, particularly with offsets in California, particularly for agriculture, but across the board.
Great. Thanks for being brief on that. I appreciate it. With that, Andy, there's been some additional links and comments put in the chat, and I think everybody can read those. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Dana. And again, I want to thank our panelists today. We're very blessed to have such experts join us. And, you know, so with that, I think Deputy Secretary Olson, I think it's clear from our discussion that there's a lot of work left to do in developing ecosystem service markets, but that the potential, both economically and environmentally, is well worth the work that it's going to take. So again, I believe this will be a topic at future ag growth summits as well. And again, I want to thank the panel. With that, Deputy Secretary, back to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Certainly want to give an extra thank you to Dr. Rice and Jason and Debbie and Andy, as you've provided us with such important information about the role that agriculture plays in addressing our climate resiliency and how we can all be active partners and participation in those efforts. So thank you again. I particularly appreciate the reminder that you shared that this is a subject that will impact all facets of agriculture production, whether it be our row crops, to our livestock, and all those of us who rely on healthy and vibrant land for our livelihoods. So with that, we're going to transition from soil health to mental health. We now turn our conversation to another topic that affects all members of the Kansas agriculture community, ag stress. We know that agriculture is a world that feels stress coming from many directions, whether it be financial worries, long days, unpredictable markets, and even more unpredictable weather can all combine and quickly become overwhelming for anyone. Caring for your own health and wellness is often overlooked amid these many concerns that we juggle. This can take a toll on individuals and families and can lead to mental and emotional distress, substance abuse, anxiety, depression, and even suicide. Our next speaker will share on the importance of addressing these issues in agriculture. Meg Moynihan is the Senior Advisor on Strategy and Innovation at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. She currently oversees MDA's efforts to support farmers and other agricultural professionals who are experiencing financial, emotional, and mental stress in their lives and communities. She previously worked as a program director, educator, and evaluator, and served in the U.S. Peace Corps, Thailand. Meg also owns and operates a diversified 70-cow organic dairy farm in LeSueur County with her husband, Kevin Studerman. In 2016, the Studemans lost their milk market, and Meg took a 7-month leave of absence to run the farm single-handedly, encountering the stress, anxiety, burnout, and depression that so many farmers experience. Meg, you're up. Thanks.
And does anybody still want to listen to this session after all of that? Well, thank you, Deputy Secretary Olson, and good morning, Secretary Beam, and everybody else there in Kansas. Hello from Minnesota. I am delighted to be with you. I'd be a little more delighted to be there in person, but we all know that's not possible for various reasons. So here we are. And it is my great fortune to talk about something today about which I'm passionate. There's nothing in that. The intro tells you what I have done to date, and some of the perspective, the experiences that have contributed to my perspectives, but it doesn't explicitly say that I am not a mental health professional, and I am not. And I will admit to you that what I am doing here at the Department of Agriculture and statewide with lots of partners comes out of both my own experience and also a lot of osmosis of working with people, seeing things up close, and working with people who are professionals in the field. And so I am a linker and a networker. And in fact, I'm here today. I think Deputy Secretary Olson was talking farm stress with my Deputy Commissioner Vobble at a conference, and I think of them as the two moms. So the moms decided that you and I should have a play date, so that's why we're here today. As a few pictures of our farm, and I will tell you that that loss of our milk market, my husband's and my milk market in 2016, really precipitated a radical change in my view of the challenges of farming, not only through my own experience, but also put me in a position. I was running the farm by myself for 6 or 8 months, and I am very much a city person by origin. Until I was 21, I had lived exclusively in cities like Milwaukee and Nashville and Providence, Rhode Island, and it put me into a far greater intimacy of what my peer farmers were going through at the time. So when I returned, I was on a leave of absence from the Department of Ag. Prior to that, I'd been the organic lady. Maybe I know some of you who are in the audience from my time as the organic lady, but I came back and really, we had some heart-to-heart conversations about what I had seen while I was away and what we needed. And we decided we needed to invest more time and effort in supporting the human experience in agriculture. And I want to say that you guys are already doing this. I was blown away by your kansasagstress.org website. In fact, I'm a little envious because I think it's better than our website. I have a little website envy. And I know that you also have really important programs existing, like the Kansas Rural Family Helpline, which I believe is through K-State, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, and that is continuing to build. And I anticipate that many of you in the audience are the same types of people from the same types of organizations that we at the Department of Agriculture in Minnesota work with. And so I really think that this is a great opportunity to share perspectives and points of view, but also to challenge each other and learn from, some of the things that we've done in Minnesota that you might want to try. And there'll be time at the end of the presentation that you could share some things going on that I might be able to learn from and import to what we're doing here. And I'm going to start by saying that my really our agency's view, but my view of farm stress, and I typically use farm stress more than I do mental health. I think that not all issues we face are mental health issues, but just about all the issues we face are stress, and the two of those contribute and feed on each other. But my view of stress is kind of like an onion, is that you see an outer layer and you think that's what you have, you peel it back and you find there's another layer, and then you find there's another layer, and pretty soon you're just weeping at all of the layers. So right in the past, and I'll give you an example of this, in the past year or so, we've had a great focus. Well, right now in Minnesota, we have focus on drought. That's another story. But collectively across the country, we've really been very aware of coronavirus and the impact on farmers and really all sectors of agriculture, value-added agriculture, services in agriculture, and all of that. And we have seen big and unanticipated changes that we have had to adjust to. Many of you have had kids at home. Many farmers now are not used to having people at home during the day. Now there are little people running around that we have to make sure are not getting into something that they shouldn't, and maybe competing for broadband and competing for attention. We haven't had to deal with this before. We have perhaps spouses who works off the farm. We have a lot of that in Minnesota. I don't know if you have that in Kansas, but we have a tremendous number of farms who have spouses who work out. And sometimes that's the male spouse and sometimes that's the female spouse. It just kind of depends. But many of their workplaces changed. And so we have people who, for example, who worked at the county FSA office who were sent home to work from home. We have people who worked in service sectors in small towns whose stores or restaurants were closed down, and so they were home. And so the fact of them being present, but also sometimes losing that farm income, has really changed some dynamics in the family. We have seen headlines like this, farmers destroying crops, dumping milk, tilling in tomatoes, and hearing consumers ask questions about that and say, well, wait a minute, what are those greedy farmers doing? I mean, maybe they can't sell their pigs, or their tomatoes, but I'm looking at the news and I see lines of cars miles long to get boxes of food put in their trunks. People are hungry, they don't have anything, and these greedy farmers are just destroying this. And what is wrong with them? And there's this understanding gap of what happens, how food gets to people, and then it's not as simple as wish it could be sometimes, that it's not as simple as the food going directly from the farmer to you. There are a lot of intermediary steps in terms of processing and food safety and other issues, but those expectations and those knee-jerk reactions can be pretty challenging. So that's what, that's been top of mind for the last year. And before that, I would say for the last 6 years where we live, and I can see from the color of your state, the state where you live, have been immense financial pressures in the agriculture sector, which we've seen not only in the crop sector, but in the livestock sector. And this is just a quick pictorial representation of the good years of 2012, 2011, 2012, 2013, when we all thought we were on top of the world. And then we started this decline in terms of market challenges and particularly commodity prices. And the darker the color, the greater the negative change in net farm income over the time. And so we have you beat. Minnesota, our losses have been greater than yours, but we're both red states in this scenario. And I run into people a lot of the time who say, well, if we could just fix the prices, if we could just fix the money in agriculture, there would not be all this farm stress. Really, if farmers could just make money, that would solve everything. And I say, the onion is deeper than that. And so this is a picture of what I think of as the stress onion. And I would propose to you that these are all sometimes micro stressors, sometimes macro stressors, sometimes episodic stressors, and sometimes chronic stressors that farmers and farm families and really other affiliated people in agricultural professions experience. What I'd like you to do, I know we have the chat operative at this point, and I would like to take about 15 seconds and ask you to look at that onion and type into the chat box one or two of those stressors that really speak to you and your own experience, either with what you're going through or what you're seeing with the farmers and ranchers that you serve, or a stressor that is not up there that you really think should be. Thank you. We're going to continue on. Feel free to keep typing that and unburden yourself if you would like to. Sometimes that can be pretty cathartic. But the point about a lot of these issues, the weather, the labor availability, the prices, the public opinion, the isolation we're experiencing, the regulations. Here I am at the Department of Agriculture. We cause stress to farmers as well. So many of these issues are just outside the direct control of the farmer or rancher. And I think that's extremely important because in my experience, farmers and ranchers are extremely proud in a good way about being self-reliant and being strong and holding things together. And they feel tremendously responsible. And that I think is responsible for the farm, the soil. We're exploring responsibility toward the soil and the natural resource base, their families, their communities, their kids, making this all work. And at the same time, there are all of these issues that are floating past them that they need to reach out and grab a hold of and manage. And they're just too slippery. They just can't get a hold of them. And that can become very, very overwhelming. And I think that this tension between feeling a sense of responsibility and feeling a lack of control has a great deal to do with farmers' identity and how they see themselves. And when I talk to a lot of people, unlike you, who are not really very involved in agriculture, but they're curious about what's going on and they want to be more available and more useful to farmers. I talk to pastors. I just did a session yesterday with a bunch of social workers from the Mayo Health System. And I hear them say, well, everybody has stresses sometimes. What is it about farming that we need to really focus on and help us understand this? And I think that there are some inherent challenges that kind of come as a set and really sometimes make things feel overwhelming. And I just have outlined a few here. I think farmers and ranchers working where they live is a big one. We do not go home at the end of the day. We live with our messes. We live with our mistakes. We live with our lists of things that are undone. We worry about whether we turned the fence on this morning when we were out moving fence for the cows. And we see it all around us. So there just really is no break from that. And our coworkers are frequently family. And sometimes that's a great thing. And families are dynamic and loving and collaborative, and they share a history together. But sometimes they're real jerks. And sometimes you're in partnership with people that, quite frankly, you love them, but you can't stand them. And sometimes you can't trust them. And so operating a business where you can't really hire and fire your boss or your subordinates or your partners can be a big challenge for farmers and put a strain just on those relationships. And we see a lot of that, quite frankly. Multiple roles. Farmers, and we've got a lot here who, in addition to a spouse working out part-time or full-time, like I do on our farm, I work out part-time. Some of our producers also have off-farm jobs. They drive truck, or they sell seed, or they are crop insurance adjusters. So they do other things. And then sometimes there is this tension between, where does my first allegiance lie? I have a duty and a responsibility to this farming operation, but I also have a job. And so when crunch time comes, how do I make those decisions about how to allocate my time? And that can be draining. I think there's some competition and envy. I have certainly seen it in my own neighborhood among the farmers that I'm neighbors with, and we wish the well for each other, but we also frequently wish that we had what the other guy has. Either parked in the driveway or in terms of rental land that they were able to get, or whatever that is. And I think that this one goes hand in hand with this next point, which is the loss of peers and community. And I tell a story about a friend of mine whose name is Teresa Hall. She farms in Southwest Minnesota in a county called Watonwan. And she said to me one day, Mick, Daniel and I moved to this farm in 1977. And I looked out my window and I could see 13 or 14 other farmhouses. And I look out my kitchen window today and I can see 2 families live in 2 of those houses and everybody else is gone. And all the land's still in corn and soybeans. And now we have some wind turbines, but the people are gone. And I think this loss of peers and an increasing sense of isolation can be extremely draining. We used to have more people who, quite frankly, were in the same boat with us. I definitely feel that in the dairy business, with so few dairy farmers left in my part of the state. But feeling like we're gone, being a little worried about, well, they're gone, am I next? There's some concern about that. And there's sometimes that feeds into the point before is it seems ironic to me that while there are fewer of us on the land, sometimes there seems to be more competition and envy for what's left. And I'm not quite sure why that is, but we see that playing out sometimes in communities. You may or may not have seen that play out in the communities that you live in and work in. And the last one goes back to this thing about the consumers being so puzzled by what was happening during the pandemic with their food supply is what I call the praise and blame whipsaw. You know, farmers and ranchers held up on a pedestal of being, you know, God created a farmer. Farmers are the salt of the earth. You know, we love farmers, the original small business people. But man, you know, they're contributing to global warming and they're polluting the soil and they're polluting the water. And I'm sure they're all beating their animals. And so you never quite know whether they love you or they hate you or what is going on. And these are the people that you're working so hard to feed, right? So there's some challenges there. And so then what happens? And I think you can kind of look at this list for yourself. On the left side are some of the issues that are visible, more visible, I think. And on the left side and on the right side are some of the things that happen down deeper. All of these things don't happen to everybody. But these are some of the symptoms and some of the manifestations, I guess I would say, of both chronic stress and some of this sudden stresses or emergent stresses, the kind of stresses that would take you to the emergency room stresses. I want to call out the one at the top left, the sleep disturbance. Sometimes it's really difficult for us to know where to begin if we see somebody who maybe we're worried about and we're not quite sure, we don't know them very well, or maybe we know them too well, and we don't quite know how to broach that conversation. I find this sleep question is really, really handy because sleep is one of the first things to be disturbed when we're upset. And sometimes that means sleeping all the time, can't get off the couch. And sometimes that means up all night and cannot shut off the movies going in our heads. And sleep is kind of a benign thing to ask about in the beginning. So talking about sleep, how are you sleeping? Sleep habits, have you thought about going to the doctor for that kind of thing? Can be an easy way, well, maybe not an easy way, but can be an entry into some of these situations. And the others are things that we watch for. And one of the approaches that we've really taken in the state of Minnesota is that we don't think it should be so hard to find help, and that help can be as close as the veterinarian who comes to do a preg check on your animals or the lady at the FSA counter. And that some people everybody needs something different. Some people need their family doctor. Some people need a mental health professional if they're struggling. Some people need a different banker, quite frankly, if they're struggling. Some people need an attorney. Some people need a pastor. So we want all of the people who interact with producers to be better grounded in recognizing and responding when they see farmers in trouble. And that involves understanding what farmers are going through, the things we're talking about today, but also having a better idea of what we do. If you are a neighbor and you're worried, having an idea of what you do. And so we've invested in some really dedicated services that I'll talk about later that are very specific to problem solving and also mental health. But we're also investing in how do we create this capacity in communities so people in communities can support each other. I do want to mention suicide because it is a critical topic for all of us. I know Kansas has not been untouched by farmer suicides, neither have we. Nationwide, rural people have a far greater likelihood of dying this way than urban people do. And there is some very interesting data about farm owners and farm workers that the CDC has published. In Minnesota, we started a project a few years ago in partnership with our Department of Health. They've mostly done the work. We just got the ball rolling on this of really kind of looking at that data and wondering whether it was catching everybody, quite frankly, because typically the cause of death is entered and submitted by either the funeral home director or a medical examiner if one has been involved. And we began to wonder, are they missing people like, do they know that somebody who is a woman, a farm woman, who may be farming in partnership with her spouse or maybe farming part-time, but also has an off-farm job, do they count her as a farmer? Do they count a kid who grows up on a farm as a farmer connected to a farm? And so very creatively, this team from the Department of Health looked at all of the suicide deaths in rural areas, and they cross-referenced those with property tax records to find out, did this person who died live on a farm? And they found that we had been undercounting women and we had been undercounting young people. So they've begun to talk about this at some suicide prevention conferences nationally about this new methodology that they've developed. A lot of the national data is right on for the male farmers, but we did find that we were missing some. And in order to do a better job of understanding and preventing suicide, we needed to know better who it's affecting and how we can create successful interventions, because prevention does work. And so we are working on that. So I just wanted to mention that Department of Health has become a tremendous partner to us in a lot of the work that we're doing. So then we come to this question of, so given all of these stressors and given the overwhelming nature and given that farmers are facing all of these challenges, so why is it that farmers don't seek help more often? And I think that there's a monologue, or sometimes it's a dialogue that goes on sometimes in some people's heads of, starting out with, I should be able to handle this myself. I am in charge. This is just goofy stuff, and I should be able to do this myself. And even if I didn't feel like I could, where would I even go? I mean, do I have to drive to town? I'm not going to drive that far. I would go to some clinic, I guess, and they're not going to understand where I'm coming from. I mean, I'm a farmer. I'm sure that they're nice people, but they probably grew up in town and went to some fancy college. And what do they know about the day-to-day challenges? That they'll probably just tell me to go on vacation. I can't do that. And if I went there, other people are going to find out, and they're going to talk about me, and maybe use that information against me. Like, what if my neighbor finds out I'm doing that and goes to the bank and says, the Studeman lady, she's off seeing a counselor. I don't think you want to rent to them anymore. Why don't you rent to me? So I can't risk that somebody else would find out. And it also costs too much. I have a high deductible, and I need to save that for if my kids need help, medical care, or my wife or my husband needs medical care, and I can't fritter this away on mental health stuff. It's going to cost $200 or $300 a time. I can't do that. And speaking of time, I don't have any time. How am I going to work this into my schedule? Things are looking pretty crappy around this farm as it is. And the last thing I need is to have to drive off, go drive an hour, see this person who's not going to understand me for an hour, and then drive home for an hour. I can't afford to do that. And you know what? Most of that stuff doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, nobody can fix what's wrong. And so it takes a lot of us to be supportive and watch and ask questions and gently guide people to finding the type of help they need if they need it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the types of help that we have available in Minnesota. And one of the programs we've had, a few of these we've had since the 80s. A lot of us in states, particularly in the Midwest, instituted some real supports for farmers and ranchers in the 1980s farm crisis. And some of those fell by the wayside. Times got good, and programs and legislatures said, we don't need that anymore because things are fine. Well, we've just been through the fact that things have never been fine, but still in all, this is one that we're fortunate that our legislature kept funding. And we have two, we used to have one, but as 2 years ago, we have two rural mental health specialists whose practice is dedicated to farmers and farm family members. They meet with them one-on-one, they go to the farmer, or they meet at some mutually agreeable location. Like Ted goes to meet people at a community college, and Monica meets people at cafes or their houses. One-on-one, there's no insurance requirement, there's no paperwork, there's no clipboard, there's just having a conversation, and there's no charge. The legislature right now, our appropriation for this program is $238,000, and that pays for 2 mental health specialists who serve our 68,000 farmers in Minnesota. And that has just been terrific. I know that there are states that have had success with voucher programs. But we like this. Our mental health specialists do a lot of direct service with farmers, but they also do outreach and talking to other people in other communities and answering questions, kind of the same way that I'm doing with you here today, but with a little bit more mental health competence and insight into actually mental health treatment. So that has been awesome. Now, there are some people who can't take the step to go and see somebody immediately, but they need somebody to talk to in the middle of the night. And for that, we have, much like you have in Kansas, we have a helpline that people can call 24 hours a day. We just added text and email capacity to it because it seems like a lot of times people are texting as opposed to calling. I don't know what it is, like the old guard, the people my age and older are all about the phone, and the people also my age and younger are all about the device. And so we decided we have farmers of all ages and all tech capacity. So let's have more ways to contact. So text and email. This is something that costs us $12,000 or $13,000 a year. And the reason it is so inexpensive is we use a mental health call center that's located in Minnesota and answers a lot of crisis lines for other programs and answers the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline in Minnesota. And they had capacity to answer more calls. And so we contract with them directly every year. And they answer the questions about for people who are needs a listening ear. They do some referrals to Ted and Monica, who you just saw. Sometimes they'll do a warm transfer. If somebody is really needs more than the helpline can offer, they will hook them up with more services from Ted and Monica. But sometimes people are calling because they need some problem solving, like they're having financial or legal issues, and they need help in that direction. And then the call center would refer them back to us at the Department of Agriculture, and we could help with our own expertise. We also have farm advocates, and I think you had something very similar. Maybe you do, but I think maybe you don't. The Kansas Rural Center at some point had a network of farm counselors who worked with farm families in the 80s, and maybe some people could chime in on the chat about that, or we could talk about that after my presentation if there's time. But these are farm advocates, are about 10 people who are throughout the state of Minnesota, and they really help farmers navigate difficult situations, typically a natural disaster or financial disaster. They have a lot, they can do cash flows, they can do workouts, they can do a lot of that financial support, but they're not neutral parties in this. They are there in interactions to serve the root farmer or the rancher's needs. So frequently they will accompany a farmer to mediation. We have a mediation program, much like you do. Our extension runs it. But the mediator is a neutral party who's trying to find an agreement that's among all parties that they all can accept. And the advocate is there looking out for the farmer. And so last year, they spent about 9,000 hours with clients. We're just in the process of adding a couple more with some USDA funds that I'll talk about in a second. And then it's not all about agriculture. We found out that our Department of Human Services supports mobile crisis teams in our communities. So I really encourage you to look outside of agriculture to other organizations and groups, if it's churches or human services or what have you, that, you know, these people will show up in street clothes and face to face when there is a disaster on a farm. Could be a suicide, could be a suicide attempt, could be a grain bin accident or other farm safety issue where people are in an acute crisis and it need immediate support. And they are there to be a stepping stone and help them plan the next few steps in their lives. They respond right away. Sometimes the sheriff is more appropriate, and sometimes the mobile crisis teams are more appropriate. I just put these slides in to say that we do have farmer lender mediation, and we also have a rural finance authority that has lending programs and works with a lot of local lenders to support loans and reduce the risk of certain types of loans that sometimes people in financial crisis really can make use of. And then we have a brochure, a website, of course, like yours, but inferior, but also a brochure where the top level programs are kind of summarized, some of the things I've talked about with you today, but some other organizations that are not the Department of Agriculture that we really want people to know about: Farmers Legal Action Group and some of the offerings that our University Extension offer in terms of financial and other kinds of support. And so we make those available freely, and people are really good at distributing that information. I want to talk about a couple of things that are available that we've done that are available to you if you would like to use part or all of them. One is we call the Down on the Farm Kit. A lot of the work that we're doing in farm stress and rural mental health came out of a workshop that we did in 6 places around the state in 2017 that got really amazing response. And we thought there's more here. We need to peel our own onion. And this was a 3-hour workshop that really helps people who are agriculture adjacent recognize and respond when they see farmers or ranchers in trouble. And we have turned this 3-hour workshop into kind of a recipe book that others can follow. And basically you need the slide set, you need the facilitator's guide, and you need a minimum of 3 local experts. You need somebody who knows agriculture really well, somebody who knows mental health, and somebody like a county sheriff who knows safety. And it's free to use. It's up on our website. We don't require a license. You don't have to be trained to use it. We trust you to use it in the way that your communities need it. And we also are perfectly fine with you adapting and modifying it. So if you want to focus on one part of it, if you want to change the pictures to represent situations that are more common in Kansas, you absolutely can do that. So that's something, like I say, we're making available, and we would love you to be able to use that in all over Kansas. So either with the Department of Agriculture, which I recommend, or on your own. But one of the reasons we did this, I'll say, is that I started, after we did these sessions in 6 locations and reached 500 people, I started getting calls from people saying, well, we heard you doing this. Can you do it in our community? Can you do it in our community? And we just weren't set up. We had somebody from the FSA, who's now our interim state director, Ted Matthews. I was part of it, and we had somebody from the Sheriff's Association. And so we couldn't just reconstitute ourselves and keep traveling around the state and do this, but we thought, well, communities could do this themselves. They just need a kit. So that's where the kit came from. And I'll also say that North Central SARE funded this, the development of this. And so it was tremendously appreciated. And another project that we've done that you could use parts of if you want is a project that started with the radio. And I'm a big fan of the radio, and I don't think I've ever been to a farm where the radio's not playing. And it's, playing in the tractor, although now they're podcasts, yes, but there's still a lot of radio, the shop, in the kitchen. And so for my money, if you want to reach farmers, you go through the radio. And we worked with the farm network called the Red River Farm Network in North Dakota and much of Minnesota to identify and profile farmers who had navigated some kind of challenge and had come out the other side. And maybe they didn't come out the way they thought they would, but they came through and they were willing to talk about it. and we did 60-second episodes that ran in prime time. So like right after the market report. These weren't buried at 1 o'clock in the morning when nobody wants to buy time. These were primo spots, and they ran in pretty heavy rotation. So like for a week, they'd run 3 times a day. And here are some of the topics that we did. We started with 5. We had funding from Great Plains Center for Agricultural Health to do 5. And then different groups and organizations ponied up and said, this is awesome, we want to keep doing this. And so now I think they're up to 30 or 35. So they're a radio episode. And then as Don said, to get a minute of good radio, I have to do a longer interview. And so what if we put the whole thing up as a podcast? Okay, so they're 12 to 15-minute podcasts. They're fairly short. You can find them at this website, or you can subscribe to them through a podcast service. But all kinds of topics. And the one that I highlighted there, it's okay to not be okay seeing a therapist. That was an interview with this great guy who happens to be the farm counselor Monica's dad. And he is from Northwest Minnesota. He talks kind of like this. He's just kind of, a regular guy. He's in his 80s. And he talks about when the 80s farm crisis is going on, he went to see a therapist. And he talks about what that experience was like. And this is not a guy who beats the drum for himself. She had to drag him to this interview. He was willing to do it, but he was terrified. And he thought, now it's been 20 years, 30 years later, I can tell people that I did this. And he said, I did it because some equipment guy at my farm was at my farm, and we started talking, and he said he was seeing one. And I thought, well, maybe that would help me. And so he did. And he talks about how some of the strategies that he learned seeing that therapist, he still uses today. And he's just like a normal, any kind of farmer that you would bump in at the cafe. He's just this normal guy. And so we really use this idea of when people hear from and about their peers, it's really meaningful. Like experts like me can come flying into Kansas and say, "Whoa, here we did this and here we did that." But if you hear it from somebody like you, it has a tremendous amount of credibility, and you're willing to listen. And so this has been terrific. So these are available if you want to use them, if you want to share them, that would be awesome. That would be terrific. We have, like Kansas, we are just in the process of receiving quite a big grant from the USDA to work on farm stress. And we're keeping about half of that money at the Department of Agriculture to do things like expand the farm advocate program and do some other work. But we're also sending about half of it out the door to different organizations, educational organizations, and nonprofits to do a whole host of projects that are anywhere between $10,000 and $55,000. And so you can see what they are up here. I highlighted a couple that I just thought I would mention. We're working with an organization called Big River Farms. That's an incubator farm for immigrant and minority farmers. And they are going to be doing some workshops about kind of health and well-being, the whole package of physical health and mental health and emotional health all together that are tailored to the needs of these communities. Very different from what the Scandinavian heritage farmers out in Western Minnesota might be interested in. So they're going to be delivering that. We have another nonprofit that has been doing marriage retreats for farm couples, and they're going to expand on doing that. And they do day-and-a-half retreats where 10 couples can come and get together and really hash some things out and explore. And the feedback, they've been doing this for a couple of years, and the funding will allow them to expand this. But the feedback they get is from people saying, we didn't realize anybody else was going through this. We didn't realize this was happening to other people. We just thought we were the problem. So that unburdening has been really helpful. We are going to be doing, the Department of Health is going to be doing what are called psychological autopsies. I showed you that suicide data, and we realize that farm suicide is a serious problem that affects people. And a psychological autopsy really digs through and talks to people who survived that person's death, who are left behind, the bereaved, and pieces together what happened. And sometimes it's a real surprise to people who lose somebody that way. And so a psychological autopsy counselor comes in and helps reconstitute what happened so that the people who cared about them have a deeper understanding of it. And can let go of a few things, but also we have more insights again to say, how could we do a better job preventing these kinds of tragedies? And then we're going to use some, the farm network that we worked with is going to work with another farm network in southern Minnesota. And we're going to expand that transformation broadcasting program to another part of the state and profile some farmers down there and some peer farmers who are going through some things. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is something that I don't even know where at the time went, but something that we're just beginning to explore that I think is cool. And so I just wanted to tell you about it. And it's called men's sheds. And basically they're activity clubs for senior guys. And they started in Australia in the 1980s. And for my money, Australia, if you're putting together farm stress programs, man, look at Australia and New Zealand. Heavy isolation, heavy challenges, and they have responded like with incredible programs. So I wasn't surprised that this whole concept was born in Australia. They now have 1,000 of these things. They're self-directed. And so they're about more than sitting around and talking, they're about doing things. And the premise is that men don't talk face to face, they talk shoulder to shoulder. And so men who do things together begin to communicate and share experiences. And so you can see they all seem like they're having a really good time. The people that are part of them love them. They're very self-directed. So the guys decide what they want to do, when they want to do it. Sometimes it involves volunteer work, making benches for a community association or fixing bikes for kids. Sometimes they go on outings. Sometimes they have speakers. But for older men, particularly those who are isolated on farms, it really, they say, has increased their loneliness and isolation. It's the harder, I know, the older you get, the harder it is to make new friends. And so this is something that is out there. Men have found very fulfilling. The health outcomes have boosted. And I haven't heard anybody really articulate this, but I have to believe that this has a lot of benefits for farm women too. if for daughters and daughters-in-law and wives who, have someplace that their dad or grandpa is going off to have a good time and not just pestering them about why they're not getting spray on those beans out there today. So that's something that's just new. There's a U.S. Men's Shed organization that you could contact if you're interested in learning more about that, or you could Google it. They're great YouTube videos. So that's terrific. And my last exhortation to you guys is just that collaboration really leads to amplification. And I know from what I have seen of your existing stress efforts and the people who are at this summit, that all of you are here, all of the organizations that I list here. And these are just some of the collaborators that we've really found are helpful. And in Minnesota, nobody really owns the topic of farm stress. It doesn't belong to everybody. We're all doing a little bit of it and amplifying and shining a light on what other people are doing. And so I think that makes it a lot easier to just bump into the kind of help you need as you're going about your life. And so with that, I will encourage you to be good partners and invite, if we have time and you have questions or feedback, I would love to have a little conversation. Thank you.
Meg, your information has been tremendous. I'm blown away by our chat. It's been very lively.
And I haven't even seen it yet, so I have that to look forward to.
You'll spend the rest of the time scrolling back up, but there were some questions. So Russ, I'm going to have you, hopefully you guys have kind of pinned those on your flag. Can you assist in helping pull some of those questions?
You bet. Thank you, Meg. So kind of a lot of the questions were surrounding funding. So could you kind of talk a little bit about the different streams of funding you guys used for these programs first?
Yeah, and there are a few. And I will say honestly, it doesn't take a lot of money to make a big impact. I mean, there are some things that are pricey, like we get $230,000 from the legislature to do that counseling. That's huge. Some of the other things we can do with a few $100s or a few $1,000s. those of you, and I know you have some elected officials here and some legislative representatives from Kansas, I should have included them on the partner slide because they have just been tremendous partners. And my secret is I love at the beginning of session, before bills are really being introduced and the committees are getting to know each other and the new members, is to get on the agenda and just do an informational session, an informational hearing about what is happening, farm stress and mental health, because they all have constituents who are facing challenges. And we just like to update them on how we've spent the money they gave us before and what's going on. And it's typically not tied to any kind of an ask. It's just here's what we're seeing, here's what we're hearing. Sometimes a counselor will go in, sometimes I'll testify, sometimes a farmer or two will testify, and just give them some information to sit on so that throughout the session, if there are other opportunities or they want to do more, we can work with them on that. So that's been a tremendous benefit. We have secured some small grants from SARE. As I mentioned before, they helped us create the Down on the Farm kit, the Great Plains Center, and those were both less. Well, Great Plains Center was $30,000 and SARE was $70,000. And for that, they got navigating stress workshops, suicide prevention training, suicide bereavement. We've done programming on that. We've done programs on supporting farm youth in stress. A lot of time we forget that kids on farms are going through exactly what their parents are going through, but they have less capacity to understand it and a lot more capacity to be affected by it. So we've done some of that. So I think you can do a lot with a little money. Part of it is because people rally around to help. And an example of that where it comes from a partnership is like our Corn Growers Association occasionally will call me and say, hey, we bought some time on the Linda Radio Network. We're not going to use this week. Do you want to use it to promote the helpline or something else? And so they've just given me, in a sense, they've given me money. They've given me this terrific in-kind contribution, but they've also given me all sorts of ears. And then in my thing, I can mention that the corn growers care about this. So. But I will say the $500,000 that's a lot of walking around money. We can all do a lot with that.
And I did see questions in that. Kansas did apply, and we are a recipient, and we do have plans to focus on a statewide campaign to continue this conversation and to continue talking about ag stress in our agriculture community.
That's great.
That's really the end of the question. I mean, there was a lot of conversation, and you'll see in the chat, Meg, there's already a lot of collaboration happening all over the place. So it's kind of one of those things, we don't know what we don't know until we start talking.
Yeah.
So.
And, my contact information was up there. And what I will say is that you might not want to talk to me. You might want to talk to your peer in my state. And if you want to do that, call me and I'll hook you up with the corn growers or the people that were doing the farm suicide prevention thing we're doing a conference for faith leaders. I'm trying to spit that out. So if you want to talk to somebody like you, but in my state about what they're doing, I'd be happy to be that doorway.
I'll turn it back to Deputy Secretary Olson.
Well, thank you again very much for sharing this topic. And I had tears welling up because Minnesota is doing so many wonderful things, and I appreciate you sparking some ideas within our state, and look forward to collaborating potentially in the future on some.
Awesome. Thank you again. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you, Meg, very much. And Kelsey, I had several thoughts as I observed and listened to your presentation. Number one, as Kelsey mentioned, there was quite robust participation in the chat. And the good thing is that we can archive that and go back to it. And we'll probably ask our crew to collectively maybe set up a response to those that we can share with folks, because there was a lot of good comments and particularly questions, so that we can keep this discussion going. The other thing that come to me is, I know we would all prefer to be together in this Ag Summit, but I have to believe that the discussion that we've had or the input that people have provided and the questions they've asked probably would not have been possible if we were sitting in a large room. So I'm really inspired by that and hope that we can follow up and build upon that. The other thing is, I started in this capacity in the winter of 2019, and that was a pretty stressful time economically for our state's farmers and ranchers. And one of the things when I went to various ag groups and organizations, the one point that came up is perhaps the Department of Ag in the state can help address the ag stress and rural stress, because they themselves as organizations didn't feel perhaps they were equipped, but yet they were very supportive of us moving forward in that direction. And so I think this was a very important session, and I appreciate Meg, but I've also want to appreciate and say thanks publicly to Kelsey Olson, who kind of took the ball and ran with it as an initiative of this agency. So our next subject on our agenda also addresses the way new and additional resources can help during difficult times. Last year, during the height of the pandemic, it became clear that one of the most essential functions in our society is supplying food to families and communities. In Kansas, nearly $12 million in federal CARES Act funds were committed to address that essential function by offering grants to Kansas-owned businesses which play a role in the food supply chain. The Securing Local Food Systems grants were awarded to projects which would strengthen that food supply system and increase capacity of that system in communities across the state. Now we're going to hear from a few of the grant recipients today, representing the breadth of the projects that have already been making a difference in their community. And I'm excited to turn this over to Scott Thelman to lead this discussion. Scott, as you'll see, has a tremendous amount of energy and passion. He is the owner of Juniper Farms and has recently been appointed to the Kansas Board of Agriculture. So Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you to moderate this next session.
Well, thank you, Secretary Beam, and thanks for everybody for joining today. As Secretary Beam said, my name is Scott Thelman, and I'm the owner of Juniper Hill Farms in Lawrence, Kansas. Instead of being at the farm today, I'm at my house, so got a simple background instead of where I usually Zoom, thanks to some internet issues. So I think all of us probably on this call today can agree that internet and high-speed broadband are very important in today's times for everyone, including agriculturalists in rural America. But that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about the resilience of our food systems. And we've got some great panelists today. But, before I introduce them, I just want to say, in this past year, and I know all of the panelists are going to agree, it has been, different times, very busy times, challenging times, but also times of opportunity for our operations. Consumers have been looking, towards growers and producers for the first time in many years, and connecting more and more so through Facebook groups like Shop Kansas Farm and just directly to our operations. And that's just been a tremendous difference I've seen in the food system in the past year, and it goes to show all of us as producers how we've responded to serve our communities. Thinking about food banks, who we have a representative of today, they have seen a tremendous increase of demand in the past year, tied to many people losing their jobs or falling on hard times, which has resulted in a lot of stress on that system, which once again, as local producers, we have been able to respond to and serve our communities with. But before I go any farther on my rant, I want to go ahead and introduce our panelists today. It looks like, I'm not sure, Dan, if I see Kathy in there or not, but our first panelist I've got on my list is Dan and Kathy Kuhn out at Depot Market in Cortland, Kansas. They are a relatively large scale wholesale grower of a variety of vegetables. Dan and I were actually just on the phone yesterday talking pumpkins and catching up, but shipping wholesale and beyond just the state of Kansas, but then also serving their community with a retail market. The next folks I've got on the list are Matt and Michelle Canny of Holy Cow Market down in Johnson City, Kansas, producing, beef, chicken, eggs, and then supplying a variety of other Kansas goods through a retail market, farmers market, and then direct to market sales through pickup and delivery. Our next panelist is Jason Smith of Grazing Plains Farm in Newton, Kansas. Sorry, didn't have that one highlighted. And it's a 5th generation dairy farm located in Southeast Newton that specializes in artisan cheeses. Then we've got Maurice Zadro of Ray's Grocery up in Oberlin. So a smaller community grocery store serving the community. And I'd love to hear more about that. And then finally, a food bank panelist, Mike McGovney, of Cunningham Community Hands of Hope in Cunningham. So thank you all for joining us today. I might just start out by having you, whether I'll let whoever get to go first, but just tell us a little bit about yourselves and what you guys are doing out there. Well, I see all the hands coming up. Dan, how about you go first? I'll put you in line. Oh, Dan, I think you're muted.
How's that?
Go.
Okay. Please excuse me, Scott. I was distracted temporarily. Can you ask that question again?
Oh, just why don't you just tell us a little bit about your operation?
About our operation. Okay. Well, we're out here in Republic County, Kansas, in north central Kansas, and we are probably 85% wholesale and 15% retail. Our biggest single crop is pumpkins and winter squash. We also grow watermelon, and which we ship all over the Midwest. And we also grow hoop house tomatoes, and we have 8 acres of asparagus, and we grow some blackberries and high density apples, and let's see what else. Odds and ends of peppers and onions and other vegetables for our retail market. And so that's pretty much it. We farm about not quite 200 acres of vegetables, and we're in the middle of watermelon. And you guys might be surprised to know we've got 2 loads of pumpkins that are leaving today. 2 semi-loads of pumpkins. We had one yesterday that left. So that's kind of what we do.
Very good. Thanks, Dan. And I just got a message from Kelsey on the chat saying that I also forgot to introduce another one of our panelists, Aaron Moreland. And I'm sorry about that. And he's up in Cedar Vale with Cedar Vale Locker. So Aaron, if you're on, why don't you go ahead and be the next one?
Sure, no problem. Yeah, I have a small meat locker down in Cedar Vale, Kansas. We are custom processing only. The grant allowed us to increase our processing facility by quite a bit, hired quite a bit of new staff, and our production's gone up about 80%. They gave us the ability to hold more animals, process more animals, and it's been a challenge, but we're moving along.
Very good. Thanks. Matt, Michelle, you guys want to chime in?
Yeah, so we are from Southwest Kansas, Stanton County, about 15 miles from Colorado, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And we raise all natural grass-fed and finished beef. We also just started doing pasture chickens and eggs. We started out doing custom quarters, halves, and wholes, and that kind of took off. And so a couple of years ago, we decided to step into the retail market. So now we have a little market on Main Street in Johnson, Kansas, about 1,200 people. That obviously is not where the majority of our sales come from. We have a strong presence online. We're trying to ship all over the United States, and with the funding that we got from the grant when COVID hit, that really helped us. And we also were able to purchase a delivery truck, so we can deliver all over the state of Kansas, going to Colorado as well. And we go to farmers markets, and that's where we're at. We have 3 kids, 3 teenage kids, so we're super busy. They help us with chickens and cattle and the whole process of farmers markets. And so there's 5 of us. Matt, he's 5th generation family farmer. So, and those are our cattle behind us. So
very good. Thank you. Hey, Jason, wow.
Hey, well, thank you. Thanks for having me on. As Scott said, I am a 5th generation Kansas farmer, and came back to our little dairy farm about 11 years ago, and bought my parents out over 5 years. Currently milk about 70 cows, and I've always had the dream, and also I've realized that to stay relevant as a small dairy farmer, I'm going to have to get a little different. Like I like to say, that the saying always has been get big or get out in agriculture, and I like to revise that a little bit and say you got to get big or get weird. And so about 3 years ago, started the process of starting an on-farm or a licensed cheese creamery as part of our dairy farm. And have been trying to figure out how to ramp that up. We started very small, pockets aren't deep, and to operate a licensed creamery, it requires a lot of capital. So we actually started off farm, and just as the pandemic hit in March 2020, we started the process of building a small little creamery on farm, and then this grant really helped us along to work at finish constructing our on-farm creamery, and then also I was able to bring a marketing manager on board, and Bonnie Brewer is on this Zoom meeting as well as my marketing manager, and she has really helped me expand our markets throughout Kansas, and also retail online shipping that really became popular during the pandemic. So still only using a very small portion of our cow's milk for the creamery, but trying to figure out how in the world to ramp this thing up. As I'm sure all of you are aware, dairy has had challenging times in the past decade, and we've kind of been stuck in this forever low price cycle. So we're hoping that by directly marketing our milk products, we can figure out how to stay economically sustainable into the next generation.
Very good. Thank you, Jason. Maurice, you want to go ahead and go next? Oh, do we have Maurice on here with Rays? Okay, well, maybe I'll move on to Mike with Cunningham.
Yeah, I am Mike McGovney. Hey, we are at a small food bank here in Cunningham. Started about 25 years ago, and it was out of the back end of a insurance agency. And so we were trying to figure out how we could scale this up, make a better product for our folks here. And through this grant, we're able to actually get a building purchased. We are now able to supply. We're open on a weekly basis now instead of somebody can call and say, hey, we need some help basis. We last summer, through when we were beginning to get this rolling, we were able to receive some semi loads of fresh produce from some of the various places around. Through that program, we got connected with about 25 other agencies and other communities. So we were kind of a hub this last summer to be able to send things out to we could get a semi load in, about 830 cases of produce at a time. We could send it out to about 25 different communities. Right now, just on a general basis, we serve about 7 small communities. We're a town of about 450. And so we've got a few smaller towns around us. We're able to help supply their needs, and folks we couldn't do before. We had no freezer space. We had very little storage space. Now we've got a nice building. We've got 2 or 3 new freezers. It's just been a great opportunity to be able to share with other folks We have a small, Pratt is close to us. They're quite a bit bigger community, of course. We have a place in Pratt called the Hope Center that's been helping people as well by getting into these, being able to receive trucks and supplies and getting on some of the other food lines. We've been able to bring in produce and meat products for that community as well. Just a quick example, this last summer, we were able to get shares off of it's a load that comes in from Convoy of Hope, and also from with this USDA did, but Convoy of Hope, we were able to get a share, and a share was 1,200, just example, 1,200 pounds of chicken. So we got 1,200 pounds of chicken here in Cunningham. We got 1,200 pounds in Pratt, and in Pratt, it took about 9 hours for them to distribute 1,200 pounds of chicken. And people are very much in need. It took us a little longer here in Cunningham. It took us about a week, but a week for 1,200 pounds in a community of 450. We just got a lot of folks in need, and we're finally blessed to be able to help them.
Good deal. Well, thank you much. And then I realized Maurice actually goes by Maury. So Maury, if you're there, I'm sorry about that. My apologies, but why don't you go ahead and tell us about what you guys are doing? Oh, you there, Maury? Oh, we might have just lost Maury. So, until he gets back on, we'll go ahead and just move on. Hearing about all of your guys' operations, how the Securing Local Food Systems grants, helped expand your capacity, increase the resilience of our food system. Just makes me think about what we were able to do with our Sparks grant that we received. And that was build a new about 8,100 square foot greenhouse that at this point pumped out about 10,000 pounds of tomatoes with a second crop going in actually last week. We were able to expand our loading docks, increase our grain bin capacity, and for our secondary business that we started at the onset of the pandemic, Sunflower Provisions and Online Grocery, it's allowed us to financially take the initiative and the jump to put in a full-scale processing kitchen so that we'll be able to process the seconds from our farm, other farms, and then provide a community space for businesses to basically incubate in and get started in food processing. And so, these grants not only, I think, helped us as producers take that next step into the direct-to-consumer marketing or pausing the perishability of local foods or expanding that custom capacity, but really allowed us to serve our communities better. But I kind of want to, turn the subject on to, just the idea of maybe the grant funding enhancing or the current operations. Dan, when I had you introduce yourself, I didn't ask about your Sparks grant. So why don't you tell us about that? Okay, you're muted again.
There, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So we have this retail space. It's an old train station that was built in 1888. It was the Cortland Santa Fe train station we've used for retail market since 1989, and we've outgrown it. And last year, we actually had an occasion when the checkout line was out the front door during the fall. So with the Spark grant, we were able to, actually what we did is we took the footprint of the train station and turned it entirely into retail space instead of office and bathrooms and storage. So we about doubled our retail space in this historic and pretty cool, beautiful building.
Very good. What a neat way to take these funds, increase food access in the community, but then also preserve and enhance a historic building. One of the questions I had, kind of written down is how did you guys learn about this funding? And how did you approach, applying for it? And then once received in terms of the grants, how did you go about, initiating that plan that you submitted. I know for us, it was just kind of a, came upon it, sat through the webinar, submitted, and then when we found out, it was like, oh my gosh, we've got to move quick with the way the rules were in that funding. And so I'm just curious to hear your guys' stories of how quick and how you found about it and how quick you had to respond with it. Who wants to start first? Maybe Aaron?
Sure, yeah.
Jason, I saw Jason's hand go up. Aaron, start with you. Jason, you're
Okay. My accountant is actually who told me about it. And you're right, it was lightning speed to try and get it all finished. I think I applied in October maybe and got it at the end of October and had to have everything completed by the end of December, by December 31. Luckily, I've got a lot of resources that were able to help me jump through and get all the things done. Because we built a new freezer, we built new pens for holding livestock, got some new processing equipment. So some of that stuff actually, it took a minute to get here, but it had already been purchased and, was on its way. But there was such a backlog with COVID that it was hard to get stuff as quickly. But it worked out. It was a challenge, but it worked out.
Very good. Jason, you want to go? Well, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Looks like it would. Okay, so yeah, the timing was perfect for us because I mean, in March we had already done a lot of we started our construction on our creamery expansion, and it was scary because the funds weren't necessarily there, but we did it anyways. And so I am trying to rack my brain how I heard about it, whether it was through my dairy creamery inspector or local FSA office, whatever. I heard about it, I think in July or something. And I jumped on that and got it applied for. And it was a fairly, I'll hand it to you, it was a fairly easy application process. But then it was, the fall it was a scramble to source. We bought a number of large refrigeration units for our cheese caves and our store, and did some updated electrical work and finished out the creamery construction in the fall. And man, the supply chains were all messed up. So sourcing refrigerators, just getting a contractor was a bear. Luckily, I had a friend, a very skilled friend who could do a lot of the contract work for finishing things out. But that was one of the biggest challenges was sourcing the supplies during a pandemic. But it all worked out, and I think we were spending money until I think December 30. So, but yeah, we got it all. It was just a huge help that hit us right at the right time.
Very much agreed. I feel a lot of that in terms of the rush to get it done, but also just it being the right time and place to truly take that next step at our farm. Michelle, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you guys utilized and where you found out about it? There you go.
Yeah, so our story was a bit like Jason's. Can you hear me? Okay. Our story was a bit like Jason. We had the cart before the horse, and actually has started implementing some new projects because people were calling us. We were having a hard time getting our cattle into the butcher because dates were starting to really fill up. And so we had to we started making purchases before we really knew where the money was going to come from. And we were just praying and going, okay, Lord, you got to provide. But what's cool is we did a Facebook Live with From the Land of Kansas. And Russell, Carrie, and Sammy came out to do that with us. And as we were walking out to the field to show them our chickens and, how they live and out in the field, they started asking me questions like, so have you had to, make purchases because of COVID? And I was telling her, yeah, we just bought this truck, and it's a reefer truck. So we can transport and deliver to, Topeka, Wichita, Denver, other places. And she said, well, there's a grant coming out. You should really look into it. And when she told me that, I about cried. It was a pure answer to prayer. And I'm with you, Jason. It was fairly easy to fill out. It wasn't super complicated. It wasn't overly intimidating. And so we pretty much had the money spent and but we were able to use it. So we had almost everything already implemented before the deadline.
Great. Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you guys did out at the food bank? I mean, you kind of mentioned it earlier, but have you had much data to kind of maybe back up how much more you are able to serve your community with capacity wise?
Can you say that again?
In terms of, you kind of explained what all went into, the grant you received, all of the work and effort and new coolers and location, but have you guys seen an increase in the need at your food bank or the ability to serve more individuals thanks to this capacity grant?
Yes, we've been able to serve a lot more people. We were serving maybe one person, one family a month with a very small amount of food before we got into this. So we started out with just doing a one day a month distribution. Once we got into our building and everything, and we've moved that to every week now. We're having from instead of 1 or 2 families, we're having up to 7 or 8 families. Last week, I think we had 13 that came into the food bank for our distribution days. Plus, we're now getting phone calls from people saying, "Hey, what can you help us out here?" For Thanksgiving and for Easter, because this is tied into a lot with our 3 churches here in town. We were able to distribute 50 food baskets at Thanksgiving and 65 food baskets at Easter to people in our community. A lot of our folk, we have a nursing home in town, and a lot of our folks that work at the nursing home are single parents, low income. And so about 25 or 30 of those families were able to help because of those particular times. We're hoping we can ramp that up even more times a year. So yeah, it is definitely very much increased our abilities and opportunities to serve.
Very good. And I've got a message or two asking me to try to turn up my microphone, and I'm not sure how to do that. So you guys will have to forgive me, and I'll start talking louder at the screen. But, I guess the next question I think about as I think about, 2020 and the pandemic and kind of the year of opening, consumer eyes opening to the food system is the amount of increased demand and Facebook messages and calls we had directly from consumers to our farm. And I think, really that's one of the true goals of, this grant when it came out is to, shorten that food system, reduce that food mile and help secure Kansas's food system for, that next event that would, disrupt it, like the supply chain was so disrupted last year. So I'm curious to hear about how your guys' businesses, handle that increase in sales, or Mike, in your instance, the increase in demand at the food bank. We were fortunate at our farm to participate in the USDA's Farmers to Families Food Box program. So we shipped about 25,000 boxes, a little over 500,000 pounds of food to area food banks through that program, which resulted in 2 additional rented reefer trucks and about a doubling of our daily or weekly output very easily. We went from a staff of about 6 employees in 2019 to a staff of about 18, if I'm not mistaken, full-time equivalents last year. We were all, didn't have much else to do after work. And so we all didn't mind working longer hours to get our community served. But I'm curious to hear how all of you guys, whether it be through e-commerce and the mailing, how you guys have been able to handle that and how this grant's helped you work more directly with consumers. Who wants to go first?
Scott, you were talking about with your Farmers to Family, we were able to get hooked up with USDA and able to bring some of those semi loads of produce actually into our community that we'd never been able to do before. Had no place to do it at, didn't have a distribution point. And so that's where we were able to help so many other communities. We would have, like say 830, 840 cases of food that would come in, and they know that we were able to get those out to about a minimum of about 750 families. That, and we only have it, so like say we have 450 people in Cunningham. We went in a huge area, we were able to help. And that was because of you guys able to get into the families, food for families or farmers to families, and also the USDA and different things. We were blessed by having those come through.
Very much agreed. Jason, why don't you tell us, because I know you mentioned earlier that the e-commerce component and the additional shipping, kind of out of state or out of the, direct to consumer market here in Kansas.
Okay, so I would just like to preface that I'm guessing all of us have, it's been a roller coaster. Just like the commodity markets have been a roller coaster, the direct to consumer markets have been a roller coaster through the pandemic. There were points in the pandemic where we couldn't begin to keep inventory enough to meet the community demand. And then there's times where it seemed like times in the pandemic when everyone seemed like they were tightening the belt and sales dropped off, and then it comes back. It's just been up and down. At least that's been our experience. And we have experimented with all kinds of different ways. Early on in the pandemic, we experimented with a home delivery. When everything was locked down, we experimented with a home delivery, drop the cheese off on the porch type of a service, which was really popular for a while, and then it dropped off. And then in the fall, when the grant allowed us to hire Bonnie, we set up a Squarespace account, an online store, which gave us access to the entire United States. And through that holiday, to the fall holiday season, man, people just loved buying, and we couldn't keep inventory on hand again. And then, and it's been up and down through the spring. I would say it dropped off again. But having that online e-commerce component has really given us access to both retail and wholesale accounts throughout Kansas and throughout more of the U.S. And I think that's going to be pretty critical for our survival in rural South Central Kansas.
Absolutely, and I'll second that in terms of the roller coaster of our online grocery business. We went from our first day of delivery and pickup of about 50 orders to almost 400 at our peak twice a week, so about 800 orders a week for a few weeks, which was just insane to have to expand that quickly. And as Aaron mentioned, in how you were able to utilize kind of your local connections and community to get your infrastructure projects built. We were utilizing our community to just help us get through that demand. So calling on folks who were delivery drivers to restaurants who, were out of work and different things like that to just keep it going. Of course, this spring, as and Douglas County is a little bit different than the rest of the state, but as we've opened up, we've seen people feel more comfortable and they're enjoying the farmers market and going back to grocery stores. But sure enough, in the past month or so, as we've seen COVID cases in Douglas County rise, we're seeing people come back to the online ordering in pretty strong numbers. I think Sunflower Provisions has served about 13,000 orders since last year. And so it's certainly kept us busy. But Michelle, why don't you tell us how you guys are handling kind of that online and that direct to consumer? I know, looking at bio, it wasn't just farmers market, but it was also pickup and delivery.
Yeah, so with the grant, we were, like I said, we were allowed to actually expand with my truck, my reefer truck, and then and help pay for that. But then we also bought another one, a much bigger one, that actually allowed us to, all the butchers, and I know you guys are familiar with this, all the butchers started filling up so quickly, we had to look outside of you know, what we were used to. I think we used 5 different butchers, and it forced us to go out of state to where we had to travel quite a ways and actually find a butcher that would be able to fit us in, because we ran out of product immediately. And so we bought a big reefer truck, and the butcher we found requires that you take at least 10 head at a time. And we're thinking, well, how are we going to get all these back? You know, frozen. We don't have enough room. We don't have enough cooler space. We already outgrew my little reefer truck. What are we going to do? So we were able to purchase a bigger one and haul it back. And with the grant money, we were also able to purchase a walk-in freezer, because we had I think we had 20 chest freezers to start out with, and we just kept running out of room. So that allowed us to expand our storage capacity as well. And then we had people contacting us from California, Georgia, people that, you know, they'd go to the grocery store, they were out of meat, or they were limiting them. If you remember, like, grocery stores were limiting people to so many pounds of hamburger or whatnot. So people would find us online and say, hey, can you ship it to me? So the grant also allowed us to find resources, the right packing materials, because where we live, it's super hard to get dry ice unless you order it in at 500 pounds at a time. And we weren't at that capacity at the time to be able to do that. So we were able to spend time and tap into our resources and do a lot of research to figure out how to ship all over the United States without using dry ice. And we found it. We're doing it. It's not always perfect, especially during the summertime when we ship to Florida and the box decides to stay on the truck an extra couple of days. But so far, all of our products have arrived, you know, safe to eat and in good condition. So that really opened up our market for us. Yeah.
And locally, we were able to, we were providing ground beef at prices that our local grocery store was, I mean, we were a better price than they were. We didn't raise our prices through all this. Yeah, could we have made some money? Yeah, temporarily. But it's kind of hard to build your clientele when you're charging them outrageous prices. So we gained a lot of clients or customers through just having product available and at prices that people could afford at the time too.
Interesting. I have a note here that I'm supposed to introduce Mike again. So Mike's out in Cummingham, Kansas at the Cummingham Community Hands of Hope Food Bank out there. So, you know, moving on from there, Dan, I wanted to ask you one last question. It sounded by 11:40, we're going to start answering some questions that are in the chat. But, you know, up there in north central Kansas, you know, what are you seeing? And you know, really anybody can chime in here. I'm fortunate being in Lawrence that, you know, within 75 miles of my farm, we've got 1.4 million people. I mean, we've got that direct to market access where you can, you know, work with restaurants or school districts or wholesalers, you know, fairly easily. But I'm curious to know, you know, the challenges that you see in north central Kansas with the, you know, serving the local food system, but then also, as you think bigger, serving that wholesale food system.
Well, things don't change as fast here as they do in Lawrence.
Yes.
Needless to say, probably. Last year, we didn't do any curbside delivery. Of course, we didn't open till, we opened about the middle of June and we're open till Halloween. And we thought about all that and we actually opened the doors and it was business as usual. We wore masks and practiced social distancing and put up those plexiglass screens in front of the cash registers. But other than that, nothing changed a lot. Our sales were up like 30% last year because, you know, for obvious reasons, people were more reluctant to go to grocery stores. They were wanting to buy local. It seemed like, I think in some ways it was almost a spiritual thing in that people wanted to know, they wanted some kind of reality. They didn't want institutional food. They wanted connection with farmers and farms. So I don't know, did I answer your question, Scott?
I think about half an hour, but I thought that was a fantastic answer. And I think all of us could agree that that spiritual connection to food was definitely something, I personally saw in this past year of people wanting to know the roots of their food. I think too often people, when you ask them where food comes from, they say a grocery store. They don't mention a farm or a farmer or a rancher or the food system that gets it there. They just say the grocery store. And I think a lot of the people we worked with in the past year wanted to reconnect with that food system, especially when they saw those empty store shelves at the grocery store. So it's very interesting. Real quick, before we go into questions, is there anything else you guys would like to add? Well, seeing none, Carrie, you had mentioned that you were kind of pinning up some of the questions. Is that something you're able to send to me?
Sure. You know what? I actually have them here. So if you're okay, I'll just bring them into the panel. We also have Janelle and Tori who are monitoring for additional questions. So I saw Jason raise his hand a little bit. I think he had a comment.
Sorry, Jason.
There's comment before we move into the question phase. So Jason, go ahead. I'll have you unmute yourself there.
You're on mute.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I was just going to mention one overarching thing that we, in our story, is that thinking about moving into direct marketing to our local community, we are creating our own infrastructure as we go. And so any help that farmers can get from the state, any dollars we can help to create our own infrastructure is greatly appreciated, because when you move outside of commodity ag, suddenly it's kind of the Wild West, and we're all trying to create our own way in this. So and any support I know from the land of Kansas has been quite helpful. Even things like Shop Kansas Farm has been helpful. So we're not all trying to reinvent the wheel as we develop our own local markets and direct-to-consumer markets.
Great, thanks, Jason, for that comment. Just a couple of comments in the chat. Heather Lansdowne dropped a summary document link. So the summary document shows a total expenditure of the 12 million, the different funding categories that the dollars were allocated, and then also a state distribution map. So if you're interested, scroll back up to the chat and you'll summary document link as well as our From the Land of Kansas link. A couple of questions that came in. The first one is for Aaron. Aaron, tell us a little bit about what it was like trying to process live animals, considering the increase and the quick increase. And how did you take that initiative and overcome hurdles? What were some of those hurdles with the quick scale up?
Well, hiring staff was a big one after we got initial new equipment, because we were really only taking about 14 animals a week, and now we're doing about 25 on a good week. It's been difficult to keep my processing facility is about 70 years old, and I've only owned it for about 3 years. It hadn't been particularly taken care of prior to my ownership, so I had to take a lot of care in updating the facility and keeping it able to meet the demands, and also too, we were taking in animals that were way bigger, beef that were considerably larger because of the time frame people were having to wait to get them in. And so it's been a challenge. I'm still in the middle of a challenge, but we're going to keep moving forward. Not sure I entirely answered your question.
You did absolutely. I heard workforce, larger carcass size, a lot of challenges to scale up and think through quickly. I'd be interested just in hearing from the other panelists. The other question that came in are, what are the top challenges in scaling your business? So, perhaps Dan, and then we could just go around the horn on just a quick response to that question that was dropped in chat earlier. top challenge. How about Dan? Okay, I'm going to flip over to Michelle. How about that? Matt and Michelle, your top challenge scaling up so quickly.
Sorry, you were blanking out. What's the question? The top challenge?
Yep. What was your top challenge to scaling up your business so quickly?
So I would say Matt's the producer, the farmer, and I'm the marketer. He went to K-State for Ag Econ and I went for marketing. So we were kind of at different ends of the spectrum. He was all about the production. I was all about the sales. And I would say meeting supply with demand.
That's an economic term, by the way.
You've taught me some things. So what do you think, Matt?
Yeah, so supply is really tough because it takes us at least 2 years to supply an animal ready to butcher. 30 months is probably closer to what most of our animals are when we butcher them. So it was scaling up on that side is doable. It just takes time. Scaling up on the distribution side of things is tough because you almost have to have your infrastructure in place before you actually have the sales available to distribute to. So it's a juggling act in that you don't want to put your money in the wrong place at the wrong time as far as scaling up. And so it's, you know, like Michelle said, sometimes you feel like you have the cart before the horse, but I think as long as you keep your focus on scaling in the right direction and meeting the supply, you'll get there, I guess. So.
Thanks, Matt and Michelle. Jason, how about you? What was your #1 challenge to scale up?
So I would completely concur with Matt and Michelle. That supply and demand with the creamery, everything it seems like it's expensive, at least for me as a shoestring dairy farmer, living on a shoestring. And so we can't outpace ourselves. Just in scaling this creamery up, I'm constantly beating my head against the wall because it's like, well, I can't go out and get big accounts until I know I can expand, but I can't get those big but I can't expand until I have those big accounts. So it's figuring out how to match those, how to get my name out. Just 3 years into having artisanal cheese creamery, I'm still not that well known. And so the marketing, and then and then access to capital for expanding, that's the perennial problem here.
Very good. So supply, demand, access to capital. Mike, what about you? With the folks of Cunningham, what would you say is your #1 challenge of scaling up and fulfilling that need for your community from the community service perspective?
Ours, first of all, was just finding a place we could even have our facility at. We initially were supposed to build a building with this grant, but we ran into a snag where we couldn't build until next year. So trying to find a place to purchase. We were able to find one, and that was probably our biggest challenge. And then now, we're having a challenge, and we're looking at all you guys and appreciate what everybody else is doing with the productions. Our biggest challenge now is to be able to keep enough food, especially the meat. We finally have freezer space, but we have very little access to getting meat in unless we just go to the grocery store and purchase it, which is not a problem, but just finding meat for our folks in the community.
Very good, Mike. What about you, Dan? Your #1 challenge to scale up?
Well, the construction itself was a challenge. And the time, like everybody else said, we were really under the gun to get everything built before the first of the year. As far as the production goes, we haven't shared the same difficulties as you guys are doing meat. We just pretty much shifted some of our product sales from wholesale to retail. And so that, which wasn't really that big of a deal. So it's actually been pretty easy for us, I'd say.
Very good. And I'm going to call on Maury. I know Maury's joined us via telephone. If Maury could just give us a perspective of what he experienced from a grocery store, and then we'll move that back to Scott to close out. And see, we have a question about the grant average, and we'll address that here in just a little bit. So Maury, if you can join us by taking yourself off mute and just give us the perspective from a community grocery store there in Oberlin, Northwest Kansas.
Am I off mute now?
You are good to go. It's good to hear you, Maury.
Okay. Yeah. Our main thing for scaling up was pretty much just changing what we did inside the store, going from people coming in and shopping to curbside pickup, home deliveries, and we had like drop-off spots too for people to go to pick stuff up. So that was kind of a challenge for us because you still have to have your certain amount of employees inside the store. Plus now we had 2 trucks going out on home deliveries. Plus we had 2 or 3 people picking orders for curbside pickup, and plus where the grant really helped us was we got enclosed cases for our produce and our dairy, and so that just helped us with just maintenance and being able to keep the perishables longer because it held more of a constant temperature. But I think our main scaling up was going from in-store shoppers to home delivery and curbside pickup.
Interesting. Thank you, Maury. I see no other questions. I did answer the grant amount. I'm going to turn it back to Scott just to kind of close out the panel and thank everyone for participating today. So Scott, back to you.
Well, to answer that question, I'll be the first one because, well, it's online somewhere. Our farm received about $88,000 through this grant. In fact, it was $88,000. I know some of the farms in my area received upwards of $100,000, which I believe was the max of the grant, and there were others that just received, about $10,000. I see that Carrie just dropped into the chat that the grants range for anywhere from $5,000 to $100,000, and so it really covered all spectrums. From I can think of a friend of mine who farms in Leavenworth County, being able to put up an addition on his building with a root crop cellar and then a generator to ensure that his meat coolers were always running. And sure enough, just the other week, a storm went through. They lost power for half the day, and he did not lose a single crop. Whereas we lost power that day and had a number of berries we had from a local grower condensate and go bad. And so unfortunately, they were not sellable after losing power for 16 hours. It just really goes to show that grants like this can, large or small, what is generally a relatively small amount of money in the general scheme of things can go so far to helping operations like ours. Gosh, it's amazing what that was able to do. We've now got an additional 2 full-time employees, because we need them. And it's only going to keep increasing from there. We're excited that we're going to be able to continue growing tomatoes through Labor Day and through that first or second week of September into, our plan is about Thanksgiving. And so that is just really, really an exciting thing to think about. I guess to kind of finish it up, there was one last question I was thinking about that I'd love to hear from all of you guys as recipients of this Sparks program. I know I'm incredibly grateful to the Kansas Department of Ag and Kansas Chamber of Commerce and the state of Kansas for even thinking about the agricultural sector. But I'm curious to know, thinking long run, thinking in the future, what can the state of Kansas Department of Commerce and KDA do to help continue growing and strengthening our food system? Anybody want to chime in first? Rory, or Maury, maybe you could chime in first, if you can hear me.
Yeah. As far as what we think they can do in the future, is that what the question is?
Yes.
I think just the program that they have like right now, just keep those funded and stuff like that. Because the grant I got was like I said, I ended up with two new coolers and a freezer that were all doored and stuff there, which helps me out in several ways. My product lasts longer, plus energy efficient, and stuff like that. So if they can just keep going more for like energy efficient, like LED lighting, help people with LED lighting and stuff like that, and just try to go more so the businesses can save more money. And then they can, they don't have to raise their prices as much and stuff because they don't have the overhead.
Very good. Maybe Aaron, you want to chime in?
Yeah, overhead is one thing that really is a killer for a small meat locker. Workman's comp and liability insurance just kills me. And so when I answered this question in the pre-stuff that I got, that if there was I'd sure like to see some sort of a subsidy or something to help with some of those costs. That's what's the hardest thing for me overhead wise is keeping up with some of that stuff. I mean, obviously it's working, but it puts me on a shoestring budget, to use Scott's term earlier.
Mm-hmm. Dan, I see you're unmuted.
I'm unmuted. Some protection with liability would be of help if there is some for agritourism, but some more would be nice. I'm really glad to see that KDA has helped us out with this. I mean, we are, especially crop growers, we're kind of the stepchildren of Kansas agriculture, or sometimes we say the freak show of Kansas agriculture. So the fact that local food systems have become more important to KDA is very gratifying, and we are very grateful for the grant we received. I guess being on their radar for whatever comes in the future is probably about all I can say, except for that whole liability insurance thing, which is very difficult for people in agritourism and for direct marketing. And one more thing I want to say is, Michelle, that picture you guys have got back there is so cool. Is that your farm or your ranch? It is? Wow, that is really something.
Thank you so much.
That looks like from an old West.
So that's our son right there. I don't know if you can see, but there's a horse.
Yeah.
Our son was about 9 years old when that happened. And people think Kansas landscape is ugly, but we always argue with them. This is on Bear Creek. There's no water, but that's part of our farm. So thank you.
Wow.
Hey, Jason, maybe you want to chime in? Oh, you're on mute again.
There we go.
There you go.
I would echo a lot of what was said, but keeping these, somehow finding a pot of money to keep these competitive infrastructure grants would be great, and also help on the marketing side from KDA and Department of Commerce would be very helpful. Another thing that's more specific to dairy, and I'll preface this by the Department of Dairy and my inspector have just been awesome at helping me set up a licensed creamery. At the same time, I have the same rules for my little creamery as the largest bottling or dairy processing plant in Kansas. And I've harped on my inspectors for the past 3 years. We desperately need a 2-track system. There are things that just do not apply to me and are extremely cost prohibitive, like the antibiotic testing on site of my milk for every batch I make, completely cost prohibitive for a little guy who's just processing my own milk. Same infrastructure I need as the big guys, and we desperately need a 2-track system, at least for the dairy inspection side. So please hear that.
Good. And Mike, maybe I'll finish up with you real quick because I know we're about done on time.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to everybody for allowing us to be here today and also to have this grant. But really, I think for us, we're in a total different situation, all the rest of the panelists, because you guys are all producing or, literally from ground to and hoof and so on. We're just needing to have maybe a better way to get connected with sources to receive food into our facilities that we can be able to give out to others.
Very good. Well, I think the last couple minutes as we've talked about what we'd love to see, we're all incredibly appreciative of a Department of Ag that is realizing that the specialty crop sector and value added sectors of our state are important along with the rest of agriculture in Kansas. And we'd love to see that support continue and grow, because as I think about my entry into farming as a first generation farmer, there was no way I would be able to make a living, a full-time living off of corn and soybeans getting started from scratch.
Yeah.
Vegetables and specialty crops and value-added production made that possible. And so I would just, I guess as the panelists, just chime out that being able to support and help grow small family farms is such a great way to create stronger rural communities, a stronger sense of security in the food system, and also, increase the value of that gallon of water we're using in Western Kansas, or increasing that nutritional value or loss of shelf life that we may be, losing to importing from other states or other countries. And so I want to thank everybody for being here today. Really appreciated the day, and I'll turn it back to Kelsey.
Thanks. I'm going to jump to Michelle. I think we got caught up on her beautiful scenery, and she wants to say something. So before
Okay, you're sweet. Thank you. Just to answer that question that you asked, one of my things would be to ask for the state to look at giving Kansas businesses, organizations incentives to use local products or to use Kansas products. We're currently working with our schools to get beef to like 5 or 6 schools surrounding us. We appreciate that because that's a part of the farm to school program that you guys have implemented, which has been amazing. We're also going to put an education piece into that also because, I've been talking to the people that are in charge of the lunch programs, and, they say the same thing. You ask a kid where their milk comes from and they say the grocery store. And so we're going to put an educational piece within that, maybe create a video on our farm where, their beef comes from and how it's taken care of, what it eats, and then, send it to the teachers in the school. So I think there's a real opportunity there. And we wouldn't be a part of that if there wasn't some incentive from the state to say, hey, let's try to get this going. So we really, really appreciate that. And then Matt has something.
No,
you're good. Okay, never mind.
Well, very well said, Michelle. I think that's a great way to wrap it up.
Thank you.
Thanks,
guys.
Scott.
We appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Hey,
Scott.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Scott, and all of you panelists. This was helpful and quite inspiring. We will try to make sure that we look for every opportunity to provide additional grants such as this. And I know there is a possibility of that occurring, but the state has to work through several challenges to make that happen. And I think one of the things that was identified earlier today as a challenge to all of agriculture is succession. And I think one of the things that the opportunities that the specialty crop operations provide is for more family expansion and helping those farmer ranch succession. So I think there's just many, many valuable attributes to seeing this grow and to help as much as we can. I would say that, it's not unusual to see the ag community do some of these amazing things. And so I think this is a good time to take a few minutes and tell you about some other people who deserve special recognition. Last year, we began a new program to help us shine a spotlight on those in the ag community who go above and beyond to serve others and the industry, and we've called it Kansas Ag Heroes. This program encouraged Kansans to nominate any individual family or business in Kansas agriculture, which they felt provided a notable contribution to the ag industry or their community as a whole this year. Just like last year, we received some wonderful nominations, and all of those who were nominated will be recognized on our website and will receive a certificate along with our thanks and personal congratulations. We did select a small number of those nominees to be recognized publicly today for different ways that they've served Kansas agriculture this year. Kelsey?
Our first one we'd like to identify is Jacob Thomas. Jacob is a third-generation farmer in Leavenworth County. When COVID hit in 2020, Jacob stepped forward to make sure his community had access to wholesome and local food. He provided access and availability to both those in need and those with limited resources. This commitment has continued throughout 2021. He is a vendor at the local farmers markets, operates a farm store, and provides numerous donations to the food box program within his community. He sells products from the other local farms and vendors, which provide a variety of products to the customers and an increased sales volume and distribution to other producers. We congratulate Jacob for the dedication he shows to serving his community.
Another one we'd like to recognize, Alice Manette of Wichita. She's the statewide agricultural reporter for Gannett, the USA Today media company, and her home base paper is Hutch News. So I've enjoyed reading many of the articles. Many of them feature articles about Kansas involved in agriculture. And over the last year, she's increased the exposure of ag news in Kansas. She's provided timely, accurate coverage of current events and interesting, thoughtful features about ag businesses. Before coming to Kansas, she's been a journalist in Maine, Virginia, Florida, and Maine. We're glad that she's now a Kansas resident, and we're glad to have her as an asset in the field of agricultural journalism and media in Kansas. Thank you, Alice.
Greg Mick is a fourth-generation owner of the family farmstead and owner-operator of a large fifth-generation farm in Osborne. Greg knows that it takes a strong community to raise and support the next generation of Kansas agriculture producers. Greg has long served as a trustee for the McFadden Trust, where he has personally supported community services, local infrastructure projects, and college scholarships. He avidly employs no-till and minimum tillage farming practices, along with other efforts to sustain the beauty and productivity of his land for future generations.
The next ag hero we'd like to note is Jamie Needham of Pomona, Kansas. She's voluntarily served as the Overbrook Farmers Market Manager since 2019, when it began with 7 full-time vendors. Today, the market has nearly 30 vendors who participate throughout the season. Thanks to Jamie's hard work, the Overbrook Farmers Market has been a blessing for many in Overbrook after the loss of the local grocery store in the spring of 2020. Jamie also coordinates several special events for the market vendors and community to participate in, including Fall in Love with Overbrook, a fall festival, summer celebration, and a holiday market. Jamie has made her mark in Overbrook.
Reverend Doreen Rice of Junction City is very passionate about feeding the hungry. Every Tuesday evening, she leads the Church of the Covenant in serving the neighborhood with cooked home meals handed out to those in need free of charge. She has also provided a blessing of the animals in the community and engages church and community members in providing needs of individuals as well as social service agencies in Junction City. We also want to recognize a few other honorable mention ag heroes. Eric Atkinson of Manhattan, Teresa Brandenburg of Osborne, Laura Hankey of Easton, Tom and Cindy Hoffman of Kansas City, and Rod Voorhees of Fredonia.
As I mentioned earlier, since the beginning of July, members of the Kansas Department of Agriculture's ag marketing team has been hosting Zoom meetings for the individual sectors of Kansas agriculture, serving as opportunities to take a closer look at the unique needs of each of these individual sectors. Hundreds of Kansas farmers, ranchers, agribusiness owners, and other leaders in Kansas agriculture participated in these discussions, which varied from sector to sector. Some of the sector breakout sessions featured representatives from state and national organizations as guest speakers. Some brought in industry experts for an analysis of current issues within that sector, and others included an open discussion with producers and business owners sharing their concerns and challenges in today's climate. The discussions that have taken place during those sessions were instrumental in helping us identify the needs and goals for those individual sectors, and that information will help guide us here at the Kansas Department of Agriculture as we serve you over the coming year. Although each of these sector breakout sessions was designed specifically for that sector, and they varied in many ways, there were clearly several common areas of emphasis that were repeated across these different sector discussions. These common issues were not a surprise to us, but it does seem important to acknowledge them and then stress their importance. Kelsey?
Perhaps the most frequently mentioned concern across the entire agriculture industry is workforce availability and development. This year, more than ever, workforce is seen as a barrier to growth in Kansas agriculture. In the ag equipment and manufacturing sales sector discussion, they called out the need for an increased emphasis on technology-related ag education at the high school level, and this was echoed by the ag tech sector conversation. They also pointed out the need for heightened awareness in programs in ag tech, data management, entrepreneurship, and technical fields, 2- and 4-year institutions. A shortage of trained workforce and a need for innovative education programs and hands-on experiences was noted by the beef, pet food, poultry, and meat processing sectors as well. Both the dairy sector group and the pork sector addressed the need for federal immigration reform with a focus on long-term visa for options for agricultural workers and the exploration of other alternative workforce programs. Several of these sectors discussed the role that automation could play in the future and how that would have an impact on the workforce issues as well. Clearly, workforce is has a difficulty being faced by everyone up and down the supply chain, and it is a subject that is critical as we pursue growth opportunities for Kansas agriculture.
The second common theme we heard across the sector sessions this summer is the need for business development support, especially for value-added opportunities and processing. Many of the Kansas agriculture sectors identified a significant need for additional processing facilities. We've invested a significant portion of the CARES Act fund grants to small and mid-sized meat processing facilities, which will help the specialty livestock and local direct-to-consumer producers. And yet there is still a lack of processing capacity in the beef industry as well as in poultry. In addition, we heard about the challenges of existing and new startup processing facilities in the meat sectors. Other producers across the state are also seeking expanded processing options, including dairy, pet food, and oil seeds. Many of these options will require a continued statewide commitment to ag business development that can help with specific needs from manufacturing facilities and distribution centers to a dynamic network between ag entrepreneurs, investors, and mentors to attract new and expanding businesses to Kansas. Business development opportunities for specialty crop producers were also supported by CARES Act grant funds, which highlight many of their needs for additional grant opportunities. Several sectors, including corn, sorghum, and soybeans, mentioned that ag business development effort must also increase focus on international market development initiatives as we think bigger than the state's borders. The Kansas agricultural exports exceeded $4 billion in 2020, which was a tremendous milestone, but continued growth for many sectors will depend on exports. From the widespread interest in expanding business development opportunities across all ag sectors, from animal agricultural commodities to equipment and technology, it's clear that this is an area which deserves additional concentration and collaborative efforts.
Collaboration has certainly been a key. We've heard it today in our conversation, and it's the next issue that was the common theme across all sectors: education and outreach. This concept of education and outreach took different forms, but was an underlying area of emphasis across most of our summer discussions. Many of the sectors want to see increased educational opportunities for producers across the state. For example, the ag equipment manufacturing and sales discussion talked about quarterly education seminars, and the specialty livestock group talked about helping to provide education for potential producers, as well as mentorship and networking. The cotton industry expressed a need to expand communication between growers and gins, so producers will know the ginning opportunities here in the state. There was repeated appreciation for the role that K-State Research and Extension plays in this process, and appeals for additional extension personnel in the form of equine, forage, and specialty crop and horticulture specialists. Other sector discussions expanded the idea of education and outreach to reach a broader audience. The animal health discussion expressed support for the industry-led proactive social and traditional media outreach with consumers, influencers, and media. And the poultry discussion would like to see that education and outreach directed to Kansas communities that have an interest in understanding the poultry industry. The Kansas Corn Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics program has been a point of success, expanding ag advocacy for K through 12 education, including an emphasis on career development.
Research continues to be a point of emphasis for many Kansas agriculture sectors. The feed and forage sector has emphasized the need for increased funding for research in Kansas related to issues pertinent to alfalfa growers, as well as other feed and forage research. We've made some progress as Kansas has implemented an alfalfa seed checkoff program, adding to the funds that are available for research and education. But more work is needed for other forage crops. The sorghum discussion addressed the concern that research funding could be reduced or eliminated going forward, which would increase the need for public and private investments into sorghum industry research. Research continues to be a critical need for the cotton industry, and the soybeans and other oil seed sector voiced their need for support of an increase in research dollars for all of the oil seeds. Some efforts for expanded industry information is underway in some sectors, as both the animal health industry and the equine industry have coordinated surveys to gather critical data on their respective fields. The animal health survey data is already making a difference, and the data from the equine survey will be available after the survey concludes in December.
Infrastructure was mentioned across many ag sector discussions this year. And as usual, it's clear that infrastructure includes a broad range of needs in Kansas communities. It means traditional infrastructure, like something of the road, bridge, rail, inland waterway, and multimodal routes that would allow for Kansas products to reach final market destinations more efficiently. And infrastructure also means the critical need for better broadband options and seamless statewide connectivity, which was emphasized by the participants in the ag technology sector discussions.
Finally, we heard representatives across the beef and pork sector industries, along with participating animal health experts who continue to express their support for a robust plan in preparedness for an animal disease event. The potential for an animal disease outbreak remains an ongoing concern, and we all agree that preparedness and biosecurity must remain a priority. Great strides have been made to help businesses across Kansas develop secure food supply plans. And the state has developed training courses to increase the number of compost subject matter experts. Research in many areas surrounding potential animal disease has increased, and it is important that support for this research continues into the future.
These issues, workforce, business development support, education, outreach, research, infrastructure, and animal disease response were not all of the issues that led the sector breakout discussions, but they create a strong foundation of topics for us to focus on over the coming year. We look forward to taking these critical issues along with others that were brought up in the sessions and coordinating with our private and public partners to move the needle on these critical needs. Many of the critical points and takeaways identified in these sectors require partnership and collaboration. That means when we click leave in the meeting in a few moments, it starts our efforts to reach out to the sector's leadership and start focusing on these efforts on what the Kansas ag community has collectively identified as important growth and success in the agriculture communities. Before we wrap up, I just want to pause here. We've covered a lot of information and we've had great participation from our attendees thus far. So if you guys have any questions or want to bring up anything, now would be the time to raise that hand or put it in the chat. All right, Mike, it's back over to you.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our planned agenda for the 2021 Ag Growth Summit. Again, we want to thank all of you for tuning in for this virtual event. And although that we truly wish we could be with you in person, we were glad that this format allowed for participation from a wide variety of locations. We know that agriculture is critical to every county and every township across the state. And just this week, we updated the individual economic reports that reflect the contribution agriculture makes in each county. Those reports can be found on the interactive state map on our website at agricultural.ks.gov/KSAG. These reports show the immense impact of the 72 agriculture and ag-related sectors have statewide, with a total direct output of over $47 billion to the Kansas economy. That impact underlines the purpose behind our mission today, and that's to continue growth in Kansas agriculture, which ultimately means growth in the Kansas economy. So before we go, we want to say that we are grateful for the opportunity we have to work here at the Kansas Department of Ag. We take it very seriously, try not to take ourselves seriously, and work for you daily to serve, promote, and grow the state's largest industry. I want to thank all of our staff for putting this together and thank you for your participation. We know if you've put significant time into these discussions, and we look forward to working with all of you as we move forward to advance the Kansas agriculture industry. Thank you and have a wonderful day.